Hi guys, tonight we're stepping way back to a night so cold that your breath turns silver and the stars feel sharp enough to cut. You're standing outside a stone cottage on the edge of a medieval village, boots crunching over frost-hardened mud. The smell of smoke drifts from a crooked chimney, faint as a sigh. Inside, a family of 6, plus 2 goats and a hen with personality issues, are trying not to freeze to death while they sleep. You probably wouldn't survive this night without a miracle, or at least without huddling beside the cow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights. You push open the rough wooden door, and the cold follows you in like a guest who refuses to leave. The cottage is small, one room mostly, low-roofed, walls of uneven stone. The fire's burned down to embers. Shadows tremble across the beams. You feel the temperature like a physical weight pressing on your chest, that kind of damp cold that seeps through everything you own. Yet somehow, this is home, and this is where people lived, worked, loved, and dreamed. The first thing you notice is the air. It smells of peat smoke and boiled cabbage, maybe a hint of wool grease. It's heavy, but it's alive. Every surface sweats with condensation, even the walls thick as your arm, built from stones dragged from nearby fields. Historians still argue whether such walls truly kept warmth in or merely slowed the cold's advance. You can almost imagine the argument happening over a mug of mead, one side insisting on insulation, the other pointing out that stone loves to stay cold long after the fire dies. A mainstream fact: most peasants in northern Europe slept in single-room cottages, their living, cooking and sleeping space all blended together. Privacy was a luxury no one expected. The quirky part? Some of these cottages had no chimneys at all. The smoke simply curled upward and escaped through holes in the roof or gaps under the eaves. The result: lungs that aged before their time and rafters blackened into near charcoal. Yet the smoke served a purpose. It preserved meat hanging from beams and discouraged insects from nesting overhead. A smoky blessing, if you like. You glance toward the hearth, a shallow pit lined with stones, glowing faintly. A pot swings over the coals, iron black and dented. The family tends this fire like a living creature, never letting it die completely. If it goes out, someone has to trudge through the dark to a neighbor's house, carrying a glowing ember in a clay pot, praying the wind doesn't snuff it out. Fire is not convenience, it's survival. Your fingers tingle. You can almost feel what they felt. The ache of cold knuckles. The constant battle to coax warmth into existence. The soundscape here is strange to modern ears. No humming refrigerator, no distant car. Just the tick of cooling wood, the faint snuffle of a pig settling down, and the sigh of your own breath. The walls, rough-hewn and irregular, trap shadows like memories. You run your hand across them. They're damp, even inside. Lime mortar seeps chill into your bones. Peasants sometimes pressed cloth or straw against the lower parts of walls to block drafts, an early, desperate form of insulation. Scholars debate whether reeds or moss packed in gaps worked better. Maybe it didn't matter. The aim was to keep the worst of the wind out, not to achieve comfort as we know it. Imagine the family preparing for bed. The eldest son pokes the fire, the mother mutters a prayer. The youngest curls up already asleep on a pile of straw. You watch them shuffle and settle, each movement economical, learned from repetition. They've survived winters before. They know the rhythm. Gather together, share heat, sleep lightly. It's not romantic, though later storytellers made it so. The smell is rank animals, sweat, unwashed wool. The floor, earthen, gives off its own damp perfume, and yet there's tenderness here. You see it when the father tucks the blanket, really a patchwork of rough wool and old cloaks, around his daughter's shoulders. You hear it when he whispers a blessing, something about saints watching the house until dawn. The quirky side of history whispers that some peasants, lacking enough cloth, would sleep under their cloaks lined with fur or straw. In dire moments, they'd even sleep under upturned sacks filled with chaff. One chronicler claimed villagers near the Baltic used fish oil on their hands and faces to repel frostbite, a curious smell to dream in. Outside, the moon paints silver lines across snow. Inside, it's nearly pitch black. The only light comes from the coals and a faint star through the window slit. That slit, just a narrow gap with oiled parchment stretched across quivers in the breeze. No glass yet, not here. You can hear the wind moan softly, a lullaby older than language. You might think sleep in such a place would be impossible, but you're wrong. Exhaustion is the great sedative of the Middle Ages. After 10 or 12 hours of labor, from dawn to dark, your body collapses into rest, no matter the conditions. The cold becomes part of the background, like the ticking of a clock. Still, the body finds clever ways to cope. You curl up instinctively, fetal position, conserving heat. You tuck your hands under your armpits. You share breath with whoever lies nearest. Medieval nights were full of shuffling limbs and quiet murmurs, dreams merging with reality. The scholar's debate continues in your mind. Did peasants feel cold differently? Some anthropologists suggest generations of exposure hardened them, that their threshold for discomfort was far higher. Others argue the human body never truly adjusts. It just endures. Either way, endurance becomes a kind of art form here. As you watch, frost gathers on the inside of the window. A rooster outside stirs too early, fooled by moonlight. The cottage sighs. Somewhere under the straw bed, a mouse scurries, seeking crumbs. And through it all, the people sleep fragile but enduring, caught between breath and frost. You take one more look around. Rough table, a wooden stool, tools leaning by the wall. A basket of turnips glows faintly in the firelight. This is the entire world for the family within shelter, work, and dreams compressed into a single stone box. It's small, humble, and astonishingly alive. The embers blink like tired eyes, and you feel your own begin to close. The sound of the wind becomes rhythmic, soothing, hypnotic. You imagine lying down among them, sharing the fragile warmth, knowing that beyond these walls the cold waits patiently. But for tonight, the stone house holds. You drift toward that first medieval sleep, neither safe nor comfortable, but somehow human. You wake sometime after midnight, though you are not sure how long you have been asleep. The fire has fallen into quiet embers, glowing faintly in the darkness. Your breath forms clouds in the air. The stone walls, rough and uneven, gleam faintly as if holding a secret frost of their own. This is the moment when you truly understand what it means to sleep inside stone. The walls do not care if you are warm or cold. They simply exist, absorbing the day's heat, giving back a slow, grudging chill that seeps into your bones. You pull the blanket closer. It smells of sheep's wool, smoke, and maybe a hint of damp earth. This, you realize, is the smell of survival. The stones that build this house were hauled from nearby fields, lifted by hands already numb from labor. Each stone holds traces of the landscape itself, river sediment, grit, and sometimes fossils that peasants might have called God's fingerprints. Historians still argue whether these thick stone cottages were a blessing or a curse. Some claim they were a sign of sturdiness, a defense against time and fire. Others say they were cold traps that never truly warmed, especially without chimneys. A simple fact: by the late Middle Ages, many rural homes in Europe were built of stone not because it was comfortable, but because it was available. Wood was often scarce in some regions, or needed for more urgent things like fences and tools. Stone was cheap if you had the strength to move it. Yet the irony is sharp. The stronger your house, the colder your nights. You reach out and touch the wall. It sweats faintly, even in freezing weather. The moisture creeps in through invisible cracks, drawn by the difference between human breath and outdoor frost. People sometimes plastered over the stone with mud and straw to block drafts. or hung woven mats against the inner walls to create a barrier of still air. These were the poor man's tapestries, practical rather than decorative. They absorbed smoke, smell, and history in equal measure. There is a strange intimacy in such spaces. The stone seems alive with echoes. Each cough bounces back. Each whispered prayer lingers. The sound of wind outside is muffled but constant, a reminder that the elements are only one wall away. You can almost feel the weight of snow pressing on the roof above you, the thatch creaking under its burden. A quirky detail whispered by old records. In some northern villages, people painted lime wash over their interior walls, not just for cleanliness, but because they believed white surfaces reflected warmth from the fire better. Of course, this did not work the way they hoped, but it made rooms feel lighter, and perhaps that was warmth enough. Imagine lying in this small space with a family of 6, the father near the door, because he might need to rise first, the mother beside the youngest, keeping the baby's face turned away from the smoke, the older children huddled together under a shared cloak. Above the door hangs a dried sprig of herbs, maybe rosemary or yarrow, believed to keep evil spirits from slipping in with the night air. People feared not only the cold, but what might come through it. Your mind drifts. The fire's glow flickers against the stones, revealing carvings someone once scratched into the mortar. Perhaps a cross, perhaps a rough face, perhaps something that only meant, "Keep me safe." The walls of such cottages often carried quiet graffiti, charms, initials, or crude drawings of saints. Some archaeologists believe they were protection symbols. Others say they were simple decoration, born of boredom during long winters. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between. The texture of the wall feels like sandpaper. You imagine how it looked in daylight, mottled grey with hints of brown and moss green. During summer, the same stones might radiate a faint heat after a long day under the sun. But by winter, they turn traitor, stealing every bit of warmth you release. There is no insulation, no air gap, just the naked contact between human life and geology. A rat scurries across the floor, seeking the faint warmth left in the ashes. It makes you shiver, but the family barely stirs. They are used to it. The sounds of the night are predictable, even comforting. The walls hum faintly with them, the creak of wood, the sigh of wind, the whisper of something small and alive. It all becomes part of the rhythm of sleep. You think about how these people must have understood their houses differently. To them, the cottage was not just shelter, but companion. They patched it, fed it smoke, repaired it after storms. They called it home, not because it was pleasant, but because it endured. There is a beauty in that sort of stubbornness. Modern comfort depends on control, but medieval warmth depended on patience. You stretch under the blanket, imagining the scratch of coarse wool against your skin. Even your breath feels thick, tasting faintly of smoke, and life shared too closely. Somewhere under the floor, a layer of straw softens the earth. It rustles each time someone shifts. In a strange way, it feels alive too, breathing with you. Historians often note that peasants' cottages were built as much by instinct as by design. A man copied what his father built, improving little by little. They knew just enough about angles and airflow to make the smoke rise instead of choke them. Still, sometimes the smoke filled the house entirely before finding its way out through the roof hole. A traveller might see villages like this from afar, each cottage with a ghostly plume curling into the night sky, as if the earth itself were breathing. The debate remains whether this smoke had side benefits. Some scholars claim it drove insects out of bedding and thatch. Others think it made everyone half blind by 40. Both are probably true. Yet people kept burning wood, peat, or dung because the alternative was worse. A silent, frozen darkness. You lie back and listen to the wind stroke the stones outside. There is something oddly reassuring about their persistence. These walls have seen plague, famine, and 1,000 winters, but they remain, holding the memory of every sleeper who leaned against them. You imagine their hands pressing where yours rests now, generations apart but joined by the same cold breath. The fire sighs. Someone beside you shifts, muttering in their sleep. The warmth of another body seeps through the blankets. You close your eyes and let the rhythm of breathing and wind merge into one slow heartbeat. The house settles deeper into night. Its stones creak, almost content, and you, pressed between time and frost, learn what warmth truly means. Not luxury, but endurance. The fire is waking up again. You hear the soft crack of a new log being placed on the coals, a brief spark that paints orange on the walls before it fades into deep red. You blink in the flickering light and watch smoke coil lazily toward the low rafters, caught in a dance that never quite ends. This small fire is the center of the world. Everything in the house, every breath, every night's rest, revolves around it. The hearth is nothing grand. A shallow pit or a ring of stones, maybe a few bricks scavenged from a ruined manor, holds the fire in place. Above it, a crooked iron hook dangles, suspending a pot that smells faintly of onion and grain. To a medieval peasant, this was not only the kitchen but the soul of the house. Without this small flame, there was no warmth, no food, no light. It was a thin line between survival and the cold that pressed against the door. You kneel closer and feel the warmth reach your face, the kind of warmth that is never enough but always precious. Smoke scratches your throat, yet you do not mind. The room feels alive again. Historians agree that the central hearth was often the only source of heat in most rural homes. Chimneys were rare in early centuries, especially among peasants. Smoke filled the space before slowly drifting through roof holes or gaps near the eaves. The result was blackened rafters and lungs full of soot. But people adapted. They learned to live inside smoke as fish live in water. The quirky truth is that the smoke had a few unexpected benefits. It drove away insects, dried herbs hanging from beams, and preserved meat stored near the roof. It even hardened the wooden beams, coating them with a smoky armor that resisted rot. Some modern restorations still find centuries-old rafters stained glossy black, proof of countless fires below. You watch the family stir in the light. The mother stokes the coals, squinting through the haze. The children are half awake, hair wild, cheeks flushed from the fire's heat. The father crouches near the flames, holding his hands close, palms red and cracked. He murmurs to the fire like an old friend. In many medieval households, the hearth was treated with a kind of reverence. Before bed, someone might whisper a blessing, asking the fire not to die in the night. At dawn, they would thank it for surviving. Imagine the rhythm of their lives. Dawn begins with coaxing sparks, day ends with guarding embers. Each night is a gamble. If the fire goes out completely, someone must run to a neighbor's cottage with a small pot to borrow a coal. People called it fire borrowing, and in some villages it was a ritual of neighborly trust. Refusing to share your fire could mark you as heartless, or even cursed. A mainstream historical detail. By the late Middle Ages, a few wealthier homes began using smoke hoods and crude chimneys, but these were luxuries. For most peasants, the open hearth remained unchanged. It filled the air with warmth, danger, and memory. Sparks sometimes jumped, catching thatch or clothing, leading to sudden disaster. Many villages lost houses to fire during long winters, yet no one abandoned the flame. You lean in and watch the light paint faces in gold and shadow. The stones around the hearth are shiny from centuries of heat. They smell faintly of salt and ash. The pot above the flames bubbles softly, releasing steam that carries the faint scent of barley. You imagine the comfort it must bring after days of hunger. Food and heat are one and the same here. Historians still argue about how efficiently these hearths heated stone houses. Some claim the heat barely reached the walls, warming only those huddled near the fire. Others think the smoke-filled air created a strange insulating layer, trapping warmth under the roof beams. Perhaps both are true. You can almost test it yourself by moving a few steps back. Instantly, the warmth fades. Cold seeps through the soles of your feet again. a reminder that comfort was measured in inches, not rooms. A small domestic scene unfolds. The mother ladles thin stew into wooden bowls, sets them near the hearth where steam curls into the smoky air. The children eat quietly, half asleep. The fire crackles like soft laughter. In moments like this, the hearth is everything. Kitchen, heater, nightlight, protector. Even conversation circles around it. Without firelight, faces vanish into the dark. You notice how the smoke thickens higher up, forming a hazy ceiling. Light barely escapes through the roof hole. The soot above catches glints of gold from the flames, turning the rafters into a shimmering cave. It is both beautiful and suffocating. The smell sticks to your hair and clothes. Your skin feels oily from the smoke, yet there is a strange comfort in the familiarity of it. The air tastes like life still burning. A curious detail recorded by travelers. Peasants sometimes judged weather by how their smoke behaved. If it clung low, rain was coming. If it rose clear and straight, the day would be fair. In a world without thermometers, smoke was the forecast. The family begins to settle again. The bowls are empty, the pot pushed aside. The father rakes the coals into a small mound, covering them lightly with ash to keep them alive until morning. He mutters a short rhyme that sounds half prayer, half superstition. Words meant to please the fire spirits, or maybe to keep nightmares away. You feel the heat fade again, replaced by the steady chill that owns most of the room. Shadows stretch long across the floor. Somewhere behind you, the goat shifts and sighs, a reminder that life shares every inch of this space. The child nearest the hearth rolls over, one bare foot escaping the blanket. The mother tucks it back in without a word. Outside, frost thickens on the window slit. The fire's glow dances faintly on the stones, making them look soft for a moment, almost human. You close your eyes and listen to the quiet rhythm of coals breathing. The house has settled back into its nightly heartbeat. Fire pulsing, people dreaming, walls waiting. You can almost feel the weight of centuries pressing down, the endless repetition of nights like this. 1,000 generations feeding embers, whispering to flames, sleeping by firelight that never quite died. You are part of that rhythm now, one more breath among many. The night deepens, and your gaze drifts upward toward the roof. You notice the faint outline of thatch and the thin cracks where stars sometimes appear. Each gust of wind makes the rafters groan softly, and tiny flecks of straw fall from above. This is the medieval ceiling, a living thing that creaks, sheds, and breathes. It is strange to think that this fragile covering stands between you and the frozen sky. The roof is made of bundles of straw tied to wooden beams, layered thick but not tight enough to be perfect. When it rains, the sound is soothing at first, like a lullaby, until it begins to drip through. A few drops fall into a pot kept near the bed, a quiet rhythm that peasants grew used to. Some nights, they would wake and shift their bedding to avoid a leak, then fall asleep again as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It is well recorded that many cottages used thatch mixed with mud or dung to make it heavier and more water-resistant. This combination, strange to modern minds, actually helped the roof last longer and kept it from blowing away in storms. The smell, however, was unforgettable. Yet to those who lived under it, that smell meant safety. Curiously enough, the same roofs often housed creatures that treated them as home. Mice, sparrows, even hens nested among the straw. Farmers sometimes joked that their chickens were overhead tenants. A few even claimed the hens laid more eggs when kept near the warmth of the smoke that drifted upward. The reality was less charming. Scratching, fluttering, and the occasional thump in the night was simply part of the household symphony. You can almost feel the texture of that straw above you. It is rough, dusty, and full of history. In summer, it keeps the sun's heat out. In winter, it traps what little warmth rises from the fire below. The layer of soot from years of smoke turns the underside dark, sealing it like a primitive varnish. Every inch of it tells a story of endurance and improvisation. Some experts believe that the smoky coating helped preserve the thatch, protecting it from rot and insects. Others doubt it made much difference. There is no clear consensus among historians on how often these roofs had to be replaced. What is certain is that they demanded constant attention. Each spring, someone climbed up with new bundles, patching holes before rain could find its way in. Imagine climbing to the roof on a cold morning, your fingers numb, the straw slippery with frost. You would work by instinct, binding handfuls of reeds together with cord made of twisted hemp. Every motion had a rhythm, passed down through generations who learned by watching their elders. When you finally climbed down, you would smell of smoke and damp grass, a scent that would cling to you for days. Inside, the roof is low enough that you could almost touch it. The smoke curls around the beams, making them glisten in the dim light. Sometimes people hung herbs and garlic there to dry, believing the rising heat would bless them with both flavor and protection. Folklore insists that evil spirits avoided homes that smelled strongly of garlic and sage. Whether that belief came from faith or experience hardly matters. The mind needs protection as much as the body. A single candle flickers near the hearth, and its glow catches a small spider web hanging between rafters. The web trembles with every breath of wind. You imagine the sound of snow sliding off the roof, followed by a silence so deep you can hear your own heartbeat. This is not the silence of peace, but of winter holding its breath. Archaeological evidence shows that roofs were often layered with different local materials. In marshy regions, reeds replaced straw. In rocky places, people used turf cut from hillsides, the grass still growing on top. These green roofs were heavy but warm, their roots binding the earth together. Some even sprouted wildflowers in summer. The line between house and landscape was never clear. You picture how the smoke must have looked from outside. It rose through the thatch like ghostly fingers, escaping into the night sky. Travelers could spot villages from miles away by these faint plumes, glowing orange in moonlight. The smell of burning wood carried on the wind, mingling with the scent of livestock and damp soil. It was a world alive with elemental odors, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, simply true. No one living here expected perfection. They expected maintenance. The roof leaked, the walls cracked, the door warped in rain. Life was a series of repairs, small acts of defiance against decay. Yet these imperfections made the house breathe. In a strange way, the gaps and holes allowed smoke to leave and air to enter, preventing suffocation. Too tight a seal, and the family might never wake again. A traveller once described such a cottage as a house that sighs. He was right. Every joint, every reed, every stone shifted with temperature and time. The structure was never still. When the wind pressed hard, the whole building seemed to lean with it, as though bowing politely to the storm. You close your eyes and imagine lying in bed beneath that roof, listening to the soft rustle of straw. A drop of water lands on your cheek. You pull the blanket higher and smile faintly. The drip becomes a lullaby. Somewhere above, a hen rearranges herself, feathers brushing straw, settling down for the night. The warmth of the fire lingers, a thin cushion between you and the cold air pressing just beyond the thatch. This, you realize, is what it meant to survive in a stone house. Not to conquer the cold, but to live with it, to make peace with the leaks, the smoke, and the creatures overhead. You drift again towards sleep, the sound of the roof whispering above you, half comfort, half warning, entirely alive. The fire has quieted to a soft amber pulse, but the air feels warmer now, softer, filled with the faint hum of shared breath. You shift slightly on the straw mattress and realize that warmth here does not come from the fire alone. It comes from people, pressed together in quiet solidarity. This is the secret of medieval survival, the art of shared heat. It is well known that families in these cottages slept close, not only from affection but from necessity. The body, after all, is a furnace. A cluster of bodies, wrapped in rough blankets, can raise the air temperature by several degrees. It is a kind of human insulation, improvised but effective. The idea of each person having their own bed would have seemed absurd to a peasant family. Why waste warmth like that? Picture the scene. The father lies closest to the door, both protector and shield against drafts. The mother curls behind him, the youngest child between them, and older children tucked nearby in a tangle of limbs and blankets. Even the animals play their part. A small piglet or two lies near the feet, breathing out steady warmth that seeps through the straw. The goat near the hearth shifts, emitting a quiet grunt, and the air stirs with life. Contemporary sources mention that in many northern villages, livestock shared the living space at night. Cows, goats, and even geese were brought inside during winter. Their body heat filled the air, and their presence calmed the human occupants. It was not considered strange. The division between human and animal life was practical, not moral. Both sought warmth, both produced it, and both depended on one another. There is a curious practice described in old accounts. Some families built low partitions to separate themselves from their animals, not for cleanliness, but to keep the larger beasts from stepping on the sleeping children. The animals were as much part of the nightly routine as the fire itself. A quiet herd meant safety. If a cow grew restless or a dog barked, it might mean danger outside. In that way, the night watch belonged to everyone. Researchers remain divided on how peasants balanced the smell and hygiene of this shared space. Some argue that the constant presence of manure and smoke kept parasites away, while others insist it caused disease. Perhaps both are true. The medieval sense of clean was different from ours. To them, filth was tolerable if it kept the cold out. Smoke disguised odors and soot absorbed them. The house, for all its roughness, had its own kind of equilibrium. The atmosphere feels heavy but strangely comforting. The combination of heat, breath, and animal presence gives the room a rhythm, as if every creature within it shares a single pulse. You can hear the subtle harmony, a child's slow breathing, the cow's sigh, the creak of wood as it expands in warmth. Outside, the wind howls across empty fields, but inside, the sound is muffled, distant, almost forgotten. It is said that children often slept so deeply in this warmth that frost formed on the inside of the window while they dreamed. The parents would wake before dawn, scrape the ice away with a dull knife, and see the faint light returning through the slit. Morning meant motion, and motion meant heat. The body learned to chase warmth with every movement. One peculiar story recorded by a travelling monk tells of a small village where peasants took turns sleeping near the hearth. Each night, one family member would move closer to the embers while another shifted away. The idea was to share the fire's last heat fairly. It sounds simple, but it reveals how carefully warmth was rationed. In a world without stoves, blankets, or insulation, fairness became a matter of temperature. You turn slightly and imagine the closeness of so many bodies. The air feels thick, yet safe. Privacy does not exist here, and no one expects it. The sounds of sleep are familiar. Soft murmurs, shifting straw, an occasional snore. To modern ears it might seem chaotic, but in this cottage it is the sound of comfort. Alone, you would freeze. Together, you endure. There is tenderness in this arrangement. The mother's arm wrapped around her child, the father's hand resting lightly on the blanket's edge, the gentle rise and fall of the family's breathing. Warmth, in this sense, is love made physical. It is the shared heartbeat of survival. Archaeological evidence shows that beds were often simple platforms of wood or woven ropes, covered in straw or dried reeds. Over time, the straw was replaced, not for luxury, but because it began to smell. The expression "hit the hay" might echo these moments, when families settled into their straw for the night, animals rustling nearby. It is tempting to romanticize such closeness, but it came with discomfort. Fleas lived in the straw, and the air sometimes felt suffocating. Yet for all its hardship, the peasant household had a profound intimacy with its surroundings. They felt their world as warmth and cold, sound and silence. Life was physical, unfiltered, and immediate. Some modern anthropologists suggest that this shared warmth created emotional bonds as much as practical ones. When families slept side by side through months of winter, they learned to breathe in rhythm, to move as one, to care instinctively for each other's comfort. Even arguments melted at night under the heavy blankets, replaced by the quiet understanding that tomorrow's survival would again depend on unity. As you listen to the quiet chorus of sleepers, you realize there is wisdom in this closeness. It teaches humility, patience, and the art of dependence. The fire may wane, but warmth continues to pass from body to body, like a whispered promise. You close your eyes again, feeling that heat gather under the blanket, and for a moment you forget the world outside the stone walls. The cottage breathes softly, alive with shared endurance, and in that shared breath the cold begins to lose. You wake before dawn, though the word morning feels generous. The fire is nearly dead again, its last glow hidden under grey ash. You shiver, drawing the rough blanket closer. It feels coarse against your skin, woven from homespun wool and years of necessity. You are wrapped in the same material that once clothed the sheep outside, now serving its second life as warmth. It was common knowledge in medieval times that every scrap of fabric mattered. Peasants owned few garments, and most textiles were made at home. The blankets on the bed were patchworks of old tunics, cloaks, and worn-out hoods. Each piece held memory. A bit of your mother's cloak might rest beside a strip from your brother's sleeve. In a world where cloth took months to make, nothing was wasted. You run your fingers over the weave, rough as tree bark. The wool scratches, but it holds heat, like a secret. Beneath it, a layer of straw crinkles softly, a reminder that luxury is not part of this picture. To sleep under everything you own is not desperation, but habit. It is the rhythm of winter, as predictable as the sound of rain against the roof. Curiously, in colder regions, people sometimes slept in their daytime clothes, adding layers instead of removing them. A tunic, a cloak, and a wool cap could mean the difference between shivering and rest. One traveller in the 14th century remarked that peasants slept dressed as if they feared to meet dawn in the open field. He was not wrong. Warmth was armour, even in sleep. You adjust your position, hearing the faint creak of the wooden bed frame. The ropes beneath the straw are loose, sagging like tired bones. Beds of this kind required regular tightening, or sleep tight, as the old saying went. The phrase has survived centuries, though few remember its origin. You pull the blanket tighter, grateful for its weight, the simple comfort of something heavy between you and the cold. There is an odd beauty in the simplicity of these layers. Wool, straw, linen, skin, and finally breath, each one trapping a little more warmth than the last. According to parish records from rural England, families might use sheep hides with the fleece still attached as extra cover. The smell must have been earthy, pungent, but it worked. Even tanned leather could serve as a crude windbreak. Some experts believe that sleeping clothes were chosen as much for superstition as comfort. A soft linen shirt was thought to protect the soul from wandering during dreams. Removing it before sleep could invite evil spirits or chills, depending on whom you asked. Others dismissed such fears as nonsense, but when the temperature dropped below freezing, belief was just another form of insulation. You glance toward the small chest at the foot of the bed. Inside, folded carefully, are a few more garments. A second tunic, a cloak with a torn hem, a pair of wool stockings patched at the knees. These are treasures, worth more than coins. A single good blanket could represent weeks of labor. When a family member died, their clothes were not buried with them. They returned to the living, stitched into new forms of warmth. There is no clear consensus among researchers about how colorful these fabrics were. Some surviving fragments suggest dull earth tones, while others hint at faded reds or greens from vegetable dyes. The poor might have dressed in shades of brown and grey, but even so, the colours changed in firelight, glowing like embers. Beauty found its way into survival wherever it could. A curious detail often overlooked is the use of bed curtains. Even in peasant homes, those with a bit of extra cloth sometimes hung coarse linen or burlap around the bed to block drafts. It created a tiny world of its own, a cocoon within the larger cold. The curtain trapped heat and muffled sound, turning a simple straw bed into a small sanctuary. You imagine lying there, wrapped in every blanket, every scrap of wool, hearing the wind sigh outside. The bed becomes more than a place to rest. It is a refuge, a fortress of fabric and breath. The rhythm of your heartbeat matches the slow creak of the timbers. Above you, the roof murmurs with the sound of settling thatch. Beneath you, the straw whispers faintly each time you move. A peculiar belief recorded in folklore suggests that placing an iron object, like a small nail or pin, under the pillow kept away cold demons. Whether this was superstition or metaphor, the meaning is clear enough. In a world where cold could kill, people gave it a name and found ways to fight it. As the first light begins to seep through the window slit, you notice the colours inside the cottage changing. The walls, once grey, turn golden under dawn's soft touch. The family stirs. The mother lifts her head, her hair tangled, her breath misting in the air. She smiles faintly, reaches for the smallest child, and pulls him closer beneath the blanket. You think of how warmth must have been a kind of daily victory. To wake up alive after a night like this meant you had won another round against the season. Each layer of wool, each handful of straw, each shared breath was part of that triumph. Comfort was not about softness, but about endurance. The fire crackles as the father stirs it back to life. The glow returns, faint but steady, painting the walls with its familiar light. You stretch your legs, feeling stiffness fade. The cold is still there, waiting, but for now you are wrapped in warmth that humans have crafted from patience, labor, and instinct. You close your eyes again, not to sleep, but to remember. The rough texture of the blanket, the faint smoke in your hair, the way the air hums with quiet life. All these sensations become a kind of lullaby, a memory older than comfort, softer than time. You roll onto your side, and the straw beneath you whispers softly. The bed creaks, a tired voice in the quiet room. In this light, it looks nothing like the modern idea of comfort. It is a frame of rough timber, rope, and straw, yet it holds the full weight of every night's dream. It is well recorded that medieval beds, even in humble cottages, varied depending on region and wealth. The poorest slept directly on the floor atop piles of straw, sometimes called bed ticks. Others had low wooden frames strung with ropes, woven in a loose crisscross pattern that sagged over time. To tighten them, one pulled on a wooden peg or simply retied the knots. The saying, "sleep tight," comes from this small nightly ritual. The straw mattress above those ropes was filled with whatever the season offered. Wheat straw after harvest, dried rushes in summer, even seaweed in coastal towns. The scent changed with every refill. At first it was fresh and pleasant, a faint memory of the fields, but after weeks of sweat, smoke and fleas, that sweetness faded. Still, it was better than cold stone. Curiously, in a few rural areas, people used dried heather instead of straw. It smelled sharp and clean, and its springy stems made the bed softer, a rare luxury, if you could find enough of it. Folklore claimed that sleeping on heather brought good dreams and discouraged bad spirits, though the real benefit was probably a better night's rest. You run your hand along the bed frame. The wood is uneven, splintered in places, smoothed in others by years of use. The ropes sag slightly, creaking under weight. A few pegs have been replaced with carved bits of bone or antler, whatever was available. Nothing here matches, yet everything fits. The beauty lies in the imperfections, the way survival shapes design. Archaeological findings reveal that wealthier peasants sometimes built box beds, enclosed on three sides with wooden panels. The warmth inside such a small space must have been extraordinary. Even a single candle could raise the temperature noticeably. Some of these beds had sliding doors that could be pulled shut at night, transforming them into tiny sleeping chambers. For families without privacy, these enclosures offered both warmth and a moment of quiet. You can almost feel the comfort of lying inside one. The wood walls around you hum faintly, holding your breath in. Outside, the room is filled with the sound of animals shifting and the slow rhythm of wind against the door. Inside the bed, the world narrows to a heartbeat, a flicker of warmth, and the smell of dry straw. Some scholars suggest that bed construction reflected local traditions as much as necessity. In regions rich with wood, frames were more elaborate. In stonier areas, beds might rest on piles of rock or clay. The design evolved with the landscape. There is something touching about that, as if the earth itself shaped the way people dreamed. A curious discovery made in a French excavation showed beds stuffed with leaves instead of straw. The researchers could still identify oak and hazel. Perhaps it was an autumn solution, or maybe the villagers believed certain leaves offered protection. No one can quite agree on why they chose them, but the detail reminds you how creative survival can be. Imagine the sensation of lying on that mixture of straw and rope. The smell of smoke clings to everything, mingling with the earthy scent of the mattress. Every movement releases a faint rustle. It is not silence that you sleep in, but a soft chorus of sounds that lull you into rest. The body learns to listen differently here. Even discomfort becomes familiar, almost soothing. At the foot of the bed lies a small chest, the only piece of furniture large enough to hold possessions. Inside are folded clothes, a small wooden bowl, and maybe a trinket or two. A comb, a needle, a rosary made from bone. Sometimes, a feather or a sprig of lavender tucked among the clothes serves as a charm for good sleep. The line between practicality and faith blurs in these small gestures. Researchers have long debated how peasants arranged their beds in relation to the hearth. Some argue that the bed was placed close enough to catch heat from the fire, while others think it was moved away to avoid sparks and smoke. The truth likely depended on space. In a one-room home, every corner had a purpose, and comfort was measured in inches rather than ideas. You picture the family now, lying in their shared bed. The father's arm around the youngest child, the mother's hand resting near the edge, ready to stoke the fire if it fades. A dog curls near their feet, twitching in sleep. Above, the roof sighs under the weight of frost. The bed becomes a small island in a sea of darkness. One peculiar observation from later records notes that some peasants placed hot stones, wrapped in cloth, at the foot of the bed. They were heated in the fire before bedtime, acting as crude warming devices. It sounds almost modern, yet it carries the same intent, to hold on to heat for just a little longer. The stones cooled quickly, but the comfort they offered in those first few minutes must have been worth every effort. You settle into the thought of that warmth, the rough blanket, the weight of another person beside you, the faint crackle of fire still lingering. Sleep comes slowly, softly, like drifting into the hum of a memory. Every creak of rope, every sigh from the straw becomes a lullaby. The night presses close, but the bed holds you steady, as it has held countless lives before. You realize that these people did not simply survive their nights. They crafted them. With rope, straw, fabric, and patience, they made something gentle in a world that was often hard. You close your eyes, feeling the weight of centuries settle into quiet comfort. The cold remains outside, patient but distant, while inside, the warmth of human effort hums quietly beneath your dreams. The night stretches on, a slow river of darkness flowing through the cottage. The fire has become a faint orange glow, its heat more memory than presence. You can smell the last of the wood, that sweet tang of ash and smoke. The air feels colder now, but not entirely unfriendly. There is a rhythm to it, a kind of peace that belongs only to those who have accepted the cold as company. It was common practice in the Middle Ages to let fires burn down gradually. Wood was precious, gathered by hand or traded at cost. Every ember was a small treasure, coaxed carefully into life each morning. People learned to live not by defeating the cold, but by working alongside it. The hearth was tended like a pet, fed and soothed, but never overindulged. To waste wood was to tempt hunger later. A peculiar fact often noted in household records is that some peasants kept a single ember alive through the night by burying it in ash. This simple trick allowed the coals to smoulder unseen until morning. With the first light, the mother or eldest child would uncover the ember, feed it twigs, and whisper to it as if greeting an old friend. The practice saved countless hands from the misery of trying to spark new fire from flint in icy air. You lie there now, staring at the dim hearth, and you can feel the cold reaching its peak. It is that deep, bone-level chill that arrives just before dawn, when even the air seems to sleep. The breath of the animals nearby clouds faintly in the dark. Every creature has curled smaller, drawn tight against the frost. According to chronicles from northern Europe, winter nights inside stone cottages could reach freezing temperatures even indoors. Water left in bowls would crust with ice. It is hard to imagine rest in such conditions, yet people managed. They layered themselves in every scrap of warmth available: straw, wool, bodies, and faith. To them, the dark hours were not a battle but a ritual, repeated until spring returned. Curiously enough, sleep itself seemed different then. The night was divided into two parts, a first sleep and a second sleep, separated by a quiet, waking in the middle hours. During that break, people stirred, prayed, whispered, or checked the fire. Sometimes they spoke softly to one another, the way you might talk half dreaming on a sleepless night. The house would glow faintly, the air thick with wood smoke and breath. Some experts believe that this segmented pattern of rest was a natural response to both environment and lifestyle. Others think it was shaped by the demands of survival, forcing people to wake and tend the fire or animals. No one truly knows, but the evidence appears in diaries, court documents, and letters from centuries later that describe the watch between sleeps. It was a time of intimacy and thought, when darkness belonged fully to human imagination. You can almost picture it, the faint crackle of rekindled coals, the soft murmur of voices, a child asking a question, a parent whispering a story. Outside, frost creeps across the ground, but inside, there is life and motion again. It feels less like fear of the cold and more like conversation with it. There is an odd beauty in this rhythm. The night breathes in two parts, just like the people within it. They learn to rest not in one long stretch, but in waves, trusting that warmth would return as predictably as the second sleep. The fire becomes a clock, its glow marking the hours more gently than any bell. Archaeological remains show that hearths were often built slightly raised from the ground, a simple way to preserve heat longer. The stones would warm through the day, then release that warmth slowly into the floor at night. You imagine lying close to that faint radiation, the last bit of comfort seeping into your bones. For peasants without chimneys, the floor was sometimes warmer than the air itself. A curious superstition from medieval England claimed that staring into the last ember before sleep could reveal the state of your soul. A bright, steady glow meant peace. A flickering, dying coal meant sin or trouble ahead. People took this seriously, sometimes whispering apologies or prayers to the fire before turning away. The idea may sound fanciful now, but in those nights of smoke and silence, the fire truly was a companion, almost alive. You glance toward the faint outline of the family in the dark. The youngest child has pulled the blanket over their head. The father lies still, hand resting near the edge of the hearth. The mother shifts, perhaps dreaming of the fields that will thaw months from now. Each face glows faintly in the dying light, fragile yet steadfast. The fire pops once, a small, sharp sound that echoes in the stone room. A spark leaps and dies. You feel it, a tiny shiver of warmth against your cheek. For a moment it is enough to remind you that warmth is not only temperature, it is presence, persistence, something that endures quietly even when light fades. You listen again, and the house speaks in its own language, a creak from the rafters, a sigh from the wind, a low snort from the cow. Each sound marks survival. In this cold, nothing truly sleeps. Everything simply waits. The embers glow like eyes, half-lidded and ancient. You find yourself breathing in rhythm with them, slower, quieter. The world outside the walls is frost and silence. But here, inside this smoky cocoon, life continues in whispers. You close your eyes and imagine the feeling of morning, the way the first pale light will reveal new frost on every surface. But for now, in this hour between sleeps, you linger beside the ghost of the fire, watching it fade and listening to the small, steady music of survival. The second sleep comes slowly, wrapped in the hush that follows the fire's last sigh. You stir and feel the fabric of your nightshirt, coarse but familiar, a comfort that scratches rather than soothes. Medieval bedtime was not about softness or privacy. It was about ritual, layers, and faith that the night would pass without harm. It is well recorded that even the poorest peasants had some form of night garment. Usually it was the same linen shirt worn during the day, loosened at the neck and belted with a strip of cloth. Wealthier folk might own a separate nightshirt, long and simple, meant to protect both skin and bedding from grime. Cleanliness was relative, but linen had one gift: it breathed. In the heavy air of the cottage, that mattered. You tug at the rough sleeve, feeling how it scratches against your wrist. The shirt smells faintly of smoke and wool fat, a mixture that never entirely leaves the skin. Over it, you wear a wool cap, pulled low to keep in heat. Everyone slept with one, from lords in manors to shepherds in huts. Hair trapped warmth, but uncovered heads lost it fast. In the coldest months, even children wore caps to bed, sometimes with ear flaps tied under the chin. Curiously, small accessories played big roles in nightly comfort. Socks or hose were often kept on, sometimes patched so many times they looked more stitch than cloth. Gloves, too, were worn indoors, fingers exposed so you could still tend the fire. A few medieval drawings show people sleeping in full layers of clothing, even with shoes by the bed in case the roof leaked. One peculiar account from a 15th century monk describes a family who hung their outer garments above their bed so that the smell of sweat and leather would remind them of honest labor. Perhaps it was piety, perhaps it was simply practical, as dry air from the hearth cured the damp cloth. Either way, it shows how work and rest intertwined. No one in this cottage sees bedtime as a luxury. It is a pause in survival, nothing more. Yet even in these humble rituals, there is beauty. The mother checks the latch on the door. The father murmurs a prayer. A bowl of ashes covers the coals, a faint promise of tomorrow's fire. The children whisper to each other, their voices soft as the falling snow outside. According to old folk customs, some families placed a sprig of rosemary or garlic near the sleeping space to ward off illness and spirits. The scent was sharp, earthy, and strangely reassuring. In a world where medicine was scarce and invisible forces were blamed for disease, such charms offered comfort. The line between belief and necessity was as thin as the blanket that covered them. Researchers have noted that medieval people often combined prayer with practical superstition. A cross drawn in ash on the hearthstone, a whispered invocation to Saint Blaise or Saint Brigid, even a pinch of salt tossed into the fire for luck. These gestures filled the long dark hours with a sense of control. In the absence of central heating, faith itself became insulation. The bed now holds stillness. Only the faint rustle of linen and the quiet breathing of sleepers break the silence. Outside, frost gathers along the stones, tracing delicate white veins that glint in moonlight. Inside, the warmth huddles where it can, clinging to wool and skin. The air smells of peat and wool grease, and under it all, a faint sweetness from dried herbs hung near the rafters. Archaeological studies reveal that dried lavender, mint, or wormwood was sometimes placed between bedding layers. People believed these herbs repelled fleas and sweetened the air. Whether or not they worked, Their scent must have carried a whisper of summer into the bleak heart of winter. It was the medieval version of a comfort candle, fragile but hopeful. One curious regional tradition in Scandinavia involved sleeping with a small iron blade under the bed to keep away trolls or night walkers. In parts of France, it was a rosary hung from the bedpost. In rural England, some left a cup of water near the window for wandering souls, so they would not linger in envy of the living. Scholars still discuss how seriously these customs were taken, but what matters most is what they reveal. People wanted peace as much as warmth. You picture yourself in that world, lying still under the heavy blanket, the wool cap pulled low, the scent of herbs and ash in the air. The faint creak of the roof sounds above you. The cold touches your nose, but the rest of you is warm enough. The darkness is deep, but it feels gentle now, full of whispered protection. Some experts think these bedtime rituals shaped how medieval people dreamed. The mix of superstition, warmth, and fear of spirits gave their dreams vivid colours. To dream of fire was luck. To dream of falling snow meant hardship ahead. A clean conscience, they said, brought quiet dreams. You can almost imagine a family waking and discussing what their minds had seen, interpreting the night like scripture. You shift under the blanket and listen to the room. The goat moves softly in its corner, hooves clicking faintly against the floor. A few sparks from the hearth make the darkness pulse. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once and falls silent. You breathe in deeply, filling your lungs with air that tastes of earth and time. The linen against your skin cools as you relax. The smell of herbs fades into the background. Sleep takes you slowly, wrapping around you like one more layer of fabric. The world beyond the cottage might be frozen and endless, but within these few square feet of shared air, there is warmth, safety, and a fragile kind of grace. The room feels smaller when morning light fades again into another long winter evening. The air is heavy with smoke and the mingled scent of hay and animals. You shift on the straw bed, and a soft grunt answers you from the corner. You are not alone, and you never have been. In the medieval house, the night was shared not only with family but with creatures who gave both warmth and livelihood. It is well known from manorial records and church writings that peasants often shared their living quarters with animals through the cold months. A cow, a few pigs, chickens, perhaps a goat or a dog, all occupied the same space. The idea seems strange to modern sensibilities, but for those who lived by the rhythm of the seasons, it was both practical and necessary. A single cow could give off as much heat as several small fires, and its slow breathing filled the room like another heartbeat. The presence of animals was not accidental. It was carefully arranged. The family's bed stood near the hearth, while the livestock occupied a slightly lower section of the floor, closer to the door where spilled straw could be swept out easily. Wooden partitions sometimes marked boundaries, but more often a simple pile of hay sufficed. The warmth drifted upward, creating a strange harmony of breath and body heat. Curiously enough, the animals adjusted to this domestic rhythm. At night, the pigs settled quietly, the cows chewed cud in drowsy half-sleep, and the dog curled against a wall, its nose tucked under its tail. Each sound they made was familiar, comforting, part of the household's lullaby. Children grew up thinking of their animals not only as property but as companions. There is a description from a 13th century observer who remarked that a cow's breath in winter was a blessing equal to fire. The comparison is not poetic exaggeration. Those who slept beside their beasts were often the ones who survived harsh winters. The arrangement blurred the line between barn and home until they became one. Researchers have found evidence that floors were sometimes built with a slight slope, letting waste and melted snow flow toward the door. Fresh straw was added each day, layering warmth like bedding. Over time, these layers compressed, creating a dense mat that held heat. It was far from sanitary, but it worked. Life smelled of soil, smoke, and manure, yet it was a living smell, not a dead one. One peculiar custom recorded in Scandinavian folk memory speaks of people thanking their cows aloud before sleep, as if to acknowledge the warmth they provided. Some even offered a handful of grain to the animals before dousing the fire, whispering blessings for continued milk and warmth. Whether it was gratitude or superstition, it speaks to the quiet intimacy between human and beast. The dog plays an even greater role in this small world. It guards, but it also warms. A dog curled at the foot of the bed provided comfort beyond defense. Folktales mention dogs sensing spirits or danger before humans did, their growls interpreted as warnings against invisible threats. In truth, their keen ears simply caught sounds the people missed, but faith and practicality blended easily in these nights. According to accounts from rural Europe, chickens too found their way into sleeping spaces, not just for warmth but for protection. Foxes and thieves prowled freely, and a chicken kept inside was one less loss to the night. Their quiet clucking became another household sound, as familiar as a child's sigh. Archaeological evidence shows that barns and houses were often connected, sometimes sharing a wall. Heat from the animals bled through the stones, softening the air. In wealthier peasant homes, a small half-wall separated family from livestock, while in poorer huts, the creatures simply nested wherever space allowed. The result was a constant exchange of warmth, breath, and scent that tied every living thing together. There is no clear agreement among historians about how these shared spaces affected health. Some suggest that disease spread more easily, while others argue that exposure to animals strengthened immunity over time. Either way, survival proved that the arrangement worked. The warmth of a cow outweighed the discomfort of its smell. You can imagine the rhythm of such a night. A cow shifts its weight, hooves scuffing against stone. The dog sighs. The child nearest the animals turns in their sleep, one hand extended toward the sound. The air is thick, but it moves, carrying a mix of heat and breath that feels strangely alive. You listen, and the house becomes one great creature, breathing in unison. A curious legend from Wales tells of families who believed the spirit of the household was shared among all its inhabitants, human and animal alike. When a beast died, it was customary to speak softly to the fire that night, asking it to guide the creature's warmth into the next world. Such tenderness may seem sentimental now, but for those who depended on their animals utterly, it made perfect sense. You shift slightly, feeling the faint vibration of movement through the straw. It is not unpleasant. The air hums with life, the warmth of the animals rising gently toward your face. You can smell hay and wool, dung and smoke, a scent that would cling to every garment you owned. In this world, odor is not an enemy. It is the proof of life. Some anthropologists think that sleeping among animals shaped human perception of comfort itself. People grew accustomed to warmth that was alive, to noise that reassured rather than disturbed. Silence would have felt eerie, almost frightening. In the coldest weeks, the absence of animal sounds was a bad omen. It meant sickness, or worse, death. As you close your eyes again, you sense the strange communion of this shared existence. Every exhale seems to touch another's inhale. The stone walls hold the warmth in, and for a few hours the world outside might as well not exist. Inside there is heat, breath, and the quiet music of survival. The fire flickers once more, casting light on the curved backs of the sleeping animals, the bundled family, the rough walls. Everything glows in shades of gold and brown. This is not luxury, but it is something deeper, the warmth of living things holding each other through the night. You breathe in slowly, the scent of hay and smoke thick in your chest, and let the rhythm of shared breath draw you back into sleep. The cottage exhales, and you exhale with it, carried by the hum of a world where warmth is communal, and life is shared with every heartbeat. The morning light seeps through the narrow window slit like a blade of pale gold, barely piercing the smoke that hangs in the air. You open your eyes and see frost glittering on the inside of the glass substitute, which is not glass at all but a stretched film of oiled parchment. It blurs the outside world into a soft haze of light and shadow. In this dim glow, you realize how fragile the barrier is between warmth and the vast cold beyond. It was common practice for peasants to use oiled cloth, parchment, or animal bladder as window coverings. True glass existed in towns and monasteries, but it was rare and costly. The thin material let in light while blocking the sharpest wind, though it could not keep out the cold entirely. The result was a strange balance of light and draught, a compromise between vision and warmth. You can feel the faint breeze sneaking in through the cracks around the frame. The chill moves like a ghost across your face, gentle yet unmistakable. The family stirs, muttering in half-sleep. The father rises first, his breath visible in the air. He walks to the window and presses a cloth into the crevice where frost has crept through. His hands are rough and red, skin split by cold and labour. Archaeological findings reveal that windows in stone cottages were often no larger than a man's forearm in width. The smaller the opening, the less heat escaped. In summer, shutters might be left ajar, but in winter, every gap was a threat. Wooden shutters, thick and uneven, were pulled tight at night and fastened with iron hooks. Sometimes, straw was stuffed along the edges to block wind. These methods sound primitive, but they worked well enough to keep families alive through the longest nights. Curiously enough, the oiled parchment itself gave the room a special quality of light. The sun did not pour in directly, but diffused softly, painting everything in tones of amber and honey. It was dim but warm to the eyes, a permanent twilight that softened the hard edges of stone and wood. Perhaps this muted glow made winter more bearable, turning the world inside into a place of quiet endurance. In some northern regions, animal bladders stretched over wooden frames were used instead. The material was translucent, thin as a whisper, and often made from pigs or sheep. When dried and rubbed with oil or resin, it became watertight and flexible. Historians still discuss whether it provided any meaningful insulation, but its role in shaping the atmosphere of medieval interiors is undeniable. Through it, daylight arrived like memory rather than illumination. You imagine standing by that small window, peering out into a white morning. The fields beyond are crusted with frost, the trees motionless, each branch rimmed with ice. The sound of distant bells from a nearby church carries faintly across the frozen air. Inside, the difference between survival and exposure is only a few inches of stretched parchment and a prayer for calm weather. A peculiar practice mentioned in rural chronicles describes people sealing window edges with animal fat during the coldest weeks. The fat hardened in the chill, plugging gaps and keeping out the worst drafts. When it melted slightly from the fire's warmth, it gave off a faint odour that mingled with the smells of smoke and straw. Not pleasant, but effective. The mother now moves toward the light, lifting the youngest child in her arms. The child reaches a small hand toward the window, marveling at the frost patterns that bloom like flowers across the surface. For a moment, even the cold becomes beautiful. The frost draws shapes that look like feathers, stars, or curling vines. In a house with few decorations, this fleeting art might be the only ornamentation of the season. Researchers have suggested that the size and placement of windows in medieval houses reveal much about how people viewed light itself. Large openings were associated with wealth and comfort, while small ones symbolized thrift and humility. In peasant homes, light was precious not because it was rare, but because it had to be earned through suffering. To keep warm, you accepted dimness. To see the world, you accepted cold. Life was always a negotiation. One fascinating discovery from preserved cottages in northern Europe shows evidence of cloth nailed along walls beside windows, perhaps as makeshift curtains. These fabrics, usually coarse linen or burlap, trapped air and blocked drafts. Some were even dyed dark to absorb what little sunlight entered. The effect was minimal, but in a world of narrow margins, every bit of warmth mattered. You can feel that careful balance now. The faint draft cools your cheek while your back stays warm from the rekindled fire. The air smells faintly of resin from the parchment, wood smoke, and the salt of drying sweat. This blend of sensations, both harsh and familiar, defines the medieval home. To modern sensibilities, it might feel oppressive, yet to them it was the texture of life itself. A curious bit of folklore claimed that the sound of wind whistling through a window crack was a voice of warning from unseen spirits. Some families tied small bells or ribbons near openings, so that if they moved, the spirits would be heard, but not allowed to enter. It is easy to smile at the superstition, but you can almost understand it as you listen to the real whistle of the wind tonight. The sound feels alive, purposeful, as if the winter were trying to speak. You sit quietly and watch the light shift on the walls. Each moment feels suspended between inside and outside, warmth and frost, silence and breath. The family prepares for another day of labor, but for now they linger in this in-between hour, caught in the glow of fragile light. As you close your eyes again, you realize that these small openings, these imperfect windows, are metaphors for medieval life itself. They let in just enough light to see, but never enough to forget the cold waiting outside. And so you breathe in, feeling the draft against your skin, and remind yourself that sometimes the smallest crack between worlds is what keeps both alive. The day fades early, swallowed by another long winter dusk. You lie awake for a while, watching the shadows stretch along the walls as the fire dies back again. The cold presses gently but insistently, a steady reminder that night rules half the year. In this darkness, time feels slower, shaped by breath and heartbeat rather than clocks. It is well documented by medieval diaries and early church writings that people of this age did not sleep in one long stretch. Instead, they experienced what we now call segmented sleep. The first sleep began soon after sunset, lasting a few hours until the middle of the night. Then came a period of quiet wakefulness before the second sleep carried them to dawn. The pattern was so common that phrases like "the first sleep" and "the second rest" appeared casually in letters and confessions. During that in-between time, the cottage became a place of muted life. The father would rise to stir the fire, perhaps check on the animals or relieve himself in the cold air outside. The mother might nurse an infant or kneel beside the hearth to whisper prayers. Some took the quiet hour to mend tools, twist new rope, or share a low conversation before returning to bed. It was not restlessness, but rhythm. Night had its own routine, gentle and deliberate. Curiously, this midnight interval was also a time for reflection and intimacy. Couples often spoke in hushed tones, sharing thoughts they never voiced by daylight. Old songs called it the watch between sleeps, a small, tender pocket of time that belonged only to them. One clerical account even described it as the hour when most confessions were whispered to the dark, not to priests, but to the stillness itself. Archaeological research and medical historians agree that without artificial light, human sleep tends to fall back into this two-phase pattern naturally. Candlelight and hearthlight offered little resistance to the pull of darkness. The human body, guided by circadian rhythms, followed the Sunday. As a result, people spent far more time in bed than we do today, not sleeping continuously, but existing in a half-conscious state of warmth, thought, and rest. You picture the family now, in that soft hour between sleeps. The fire glows faintly, enough to outline faces in gentle amber. The mother turns on her side, one arm still curled protectively around the youngest. The father sits at the hearth, feeding small twigs into the embers. The sound is delicate, like paper tearing softly. Above him, the roof beams drip occasionally as frost melts and refreezes. A curious note found in a 14th century sermon described this mid-sleep wakefulness as an ideal time for prayer, when God listens most closely. Whether out of faith or habit, peasants often murmured small devotions during the quiet hours, asking for mild weather, strong crops, or the safety of travelling kin. In a world where fate turned easily, these whispered hopes felt as essential as warmth itself. You can almost hear them now, low voices weaving through the smoky air. Perhaps the father murmurs to Saint Bridget, patroness of hearth and home, or to Saint Nicholas, protector of children. Perhaps the mother hums softly, a tune with no words, just the comfort of sound. The children shift in their sleep, their small breaths sinking with the sighing wind outside. Researchers remain divided on whether this broken pattern of sleep made people more rested or more weary. Some claim that 2 sleeps allowed for deeper dreams, richer and more vivid, while others believe it simply reflected exhaustion and poor conditions. Whatever the truth, there is something undeniably human about this rhythm, the way it mirrors the natural ebb and flow of life itself. You move slightly, listening to the cottage breathe. The air hums faintly with warmth from the fire, but the corners of the room remain cold enough for frost to linger. The animals stir in the shadows, hooves shifting on straw. The scent of wood smoke and earth fills your lungs. Outside, snow begins to fall again, each flake settling silently on the thatch above. It is in this suspended moment that imagination wakes. People of the Middle Ages often spoke of dreaming twice. The first dreams belong to the body, shaped by hunger, fatigue, and heat. The second dreams belong to the spirit, touched by whatever prayers or thoughts filled the waking interval. Some believed that what you dreamed after your second sleep revealed your truest self. Folklore from the Alps claims that if you wish to see the future, you should wake between sleeps and place your hand on your heart while staring into the last coal of the fire. The coal would show you a brief image of what awaited in the coming season. The story might be superstition, but its endurance speaks to how much meaning people found in the night. You lie quietly now, halfway between waking and dream. The cottage around you seems to pulse with life. The wood creaks softly as it expands in the warmth of the fire. A small draught moves across your face, carrying the faint scent of ash. The father settles back into bed, the floor sighing under his weight. The silence that follows is deep, almost sacred. In this hour, before the second sleep claims everyone again, you feel the shape of medieval time itself. It is not rushed or divided by clocks. It moves like breath, slow and cyclical, guided by light and darkness. The night invites reflection, not resistance. Your eyes grow heavy again. The fire flickers once, then steadies. The air cools, but not enough to bite. The quiet returns, thick and complete. Somewhere outside, the snow keeps falling, each flake erasing sound, softening the world until even thought grows still. You drift back towards sleep, not with the abruptness of exhaustion, but with the calm acceptance of rhythm. The house breathes, the fire glows, and the long medieval night folds you gently into its patient embrace. You wake again sometime before dawn, though it is hard to tell where the dream ends and the morning begins. The air has grown still and heavy, the fire long gone cold. When you shift under the blanket, something tickles your neck, and you brush it away instinctively. It is nothing unusual here. The cottage, for all its warmth and endurance, is also alive in ways you would rather not think about. It is well documented by medieval chroniclers and later physicians that beds in peasant homes teemed with life. Fleas, lice, and mites thrived in the straw, in the seams of clothing, and in the folds of blankets. Cleanliness was not entirely neglected, but limited by the lack of water and soap. Families might bathe a few times a year, if that, usually around holidays. Between those rare occasions, the body adapted to its companions. A curious note found in a 15th century medical text suggests that smoke from peat fires helped keep biting vermin at bay. Whether this was true or hopeful imagination, it reveals how people perceived their surroundings. Smoke was not just warmth or preservation, it was a kind of invisible armor against discomfort. The smell that clung to every wall and garment carried both nuisance and protection. You lift the blanket slightly, and the smell rises up. Straw, wool, sweat and smoke. It is not pleasant, but it is familiar. The straw crackles softly as you move, a sound that might once have been comforting. Over time, the bedding flattens, the stems breaking into dust. New straw is added every few weeks, creating a layered history of nights gone by. When the floor is cleaned, the old bedding is thrown out to the animals or the garden, returning warmth to the soil that once fed the grain. Contemporary accounts mention that children sometimes helped their parents beat the bedding, taking the straw outside to shake it and kill insects. This task was done on clear days when smoke from the hearth could cleanse the emptied space. The process left the interior smelling strongly of earth and ash, a scent that meant renewal. The cycle of infestation and cleaning repeated endlessly, accepted as part of life rather than something to conquer. There is an odd resilience in this acceptance. To modern minds it might seem unbearable, but to them it was simply another texture of existence. The body adjusted, the skin grew tougher, the itch became background noise. The idea of comfort itself was different. Survival dulled the edges of disgust. A curious story from a 13th century French folktale tells of a farmer who sprinkled herbs and ashes into his bed to keep away creeping guests. Some regions used dried mint or tansy for the same purpose, believing the strong scent would drive away pests. Others lined their bedding with fern fronds, both for softness and for the faint, bitter aroma that insects disliked. Whether or not it worked, it made the act of lying down feel like an act of care. Researchers have found remnants of beds from preserved peat bogs and archaeological sites, showing layers of straw mixed with moss and even seaweed. Each ingredient carried its own properties. Moss absorbed moisture, seaweed added springiness, straw gave structure. Together, they formed an ever-changing ecosystem beneath every sleeper. You imagine the sensation now, the rustling beneath your body, the faint scratch at the ankle, the way the straw shifts each time you breathe. Sleep here is never deep or still. It is a negotiation between exhaustion and irritation. Yet somehow, people still dreamed, still woke, still lived full lives inside these imperfect beds. There is a certain dark humor in how they treated these inconveniences. In some regions, fleas were jokingly called the poor man's jewelry, and finding a few in your blanket meant that at least you were still warm enough for life to thrive. Laughter, perhaps, was the only luxury free of cost. Historians remain divided on whether these living conditions shortened life expectancy or merely shaped a different standard of health. Some argue that constant exposure built resistance, others that it wore the body down. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Endurance was both their sickness and their strength. You think of how those people might have felt, waking to the same small annoyances every day, the scratching, the shifting straw, the faint rustle of unseen company in the night. Yet when they rose to face another day of labor, they carried on without complaint. The body learned to coexist with discomfort, the way the mind learned to coexist with fear of the cold. A peculiar superstition from the British Isles claimed that fleas carried away illness if you allowed them to bite freely for one night each month. The idea was that your blood's impurities would leave with them. It was a kind of grim optimism, turning misery into medicine. Whether anyone truly believed it or simply needed something to believe, it offered comfort of a sort. You turn your head and look toward the fire, now no more than a faint heap of ash. The room is dim, yet the air feels alive with tiny motions. The soft twitch of a sleeping animal, the whisper of straw, the faint tapping of frost melting and freezing again. This is the pulse of the cottage, imperfect but enduring. A low sound comes from the corner, a pig stirring in its sleep. The air moves, warmer for a moment. You take another breath, heavy with smoke and life, and feel strangely grateful. Even the imperfections carry warmth. Even the discomfort means you are still here, still part of this breathing, flickering world. As you settle back into the straw, the itch fades into the rhythm of the night. Your body learns again the old lesson of endurance. Sleep is not absence, but surrender, and the house holds you gently, alive in every corner, alive even in its smallest discomforts. The cold has deepened again. The air that slips through the door feels sharp enough to slice through breath. Someone stirs near the hearth, pulling a small clay jug from the shadows. You smell it before you see it, that sweet, sour aroma of ale. A quiet comfort in a world without modern warmth, a liquid blanket for the soul. It is well recorded that peasants in medieval Europe rarely drank water straight from wells or streams, especially in winter. Instead, they brewed weak ale known as small beer. It was low in alcohol, barely stronger than modern lemonade, but the brewing process made it safer and, more importantly, nourishing. The barley and oats left in the mixture added a faint sweetness and a little body to otherwise meagre diets. You can imagine the father now, seated by the ashes, taking a careful sip from the jug. The ale is warm from the fire's memory, flat but soothing. It slides down the throat and spreads a faint heat through the chest. He passes it to the mother, who drinks quietly before handing it back. The children will have their turn too. Even they drink small beer, not for pleasure but survival. Curiously enough, records from manorial accounts mention that some families brewed at home using whatever they could find: barley, oats, rye, or even dried peas. The result was often cloudy, thick, and faintly sour. It would not win prizes, but it kept the body moving and the cold at bay. The smell of yeast and malt lingered in cottages year-round, joining the perfume of smoke and sweat. You take in that imagined scent now. It is earthy and alive, faintly sweet, faintly bitter, the smell of effort. Brewing was not a task for leisure, but for continuity. Each household guarded its small supply, measuring portions carefully through winter. The act of sharing a drink before bed was a form of communion, a wordless agreement that life, however hard, still contained small kindnesses. Accounts from travellers and monks often note that ale played a role beyond nourishment. It softened conversation, warmed bones, and filled the long nights with laughter, when laughter was possible. After a day of labour in frozen fields, even a mouthful felt like luxury. People might have sung quietly, old folk songs or hymns reshaped by time. The sound of low voices rising and falling beside a crackling hearth was the medieval equivalent of a lullaby. One curious detail from brewing guides of the period mentions that some peasants added honey or herbs like yarrow or bog myrtle when they could afford them. These ingredients changed the taste and gave the illusion of strength. A few believed they had medicinal powers, capable of protecting against fever or melancholy. Perhaps they did, if only in spirit. Researchers have found that communal drinking was one of the few times when daily hierarchy softened. The same ale that the father drank, the child could taste too. The same warmth spread through everybody. In those small, smoky rooms, social distance melted. Everyone for a moment shared the same comfort. You imagine how it must have felt to cradle that small jug between cold hands. The clay holds faint warmth from the fire, the liquid within thicker than water, a touch of bitterness and life in every swallow. The father leans back, his breath easing. The mother smiles faintly, her shoulders relaxing under layers of wool. Around them, the children drowse again, faces rosy in the dim light. A peculiar superstition held that spilling ale on the hearth before sleep would please the household spirits and keep the fire alive through the night. Some families poured a few drops each evening, a simple act of gratitude. To them, warmth was a gift that deserved acknowledgement, whether given by God, luck, or their own hands. Scholars continue to debate whether alcohol consumption in peasant life was more comfort or crutch. Some claim it dulled the senses and made hardship bearable. Others see it as part of their cultural resilience, a shared ritual that connected labour, faith, and rest. Both ideas carry truth. When nights lasted 14 hours, and the cold pressed against every stone, anything that softened the edge of awareness was mercy. The dog shifts beside the fire, one paw twitching as it dreams. The father places the jug aside and lies down again, wrapping an arm around his wife. The faint smell of ale lingers in the air, mixing with smoke and wool. Outside, the wind has quieted. Even the frost seems to pause, listening. You feel the heat from the ale still spreading through your chest, even as the room cools again. The drink's warmth is not strong enough to last, but it leaves behind something gentler, a calm hum that settles between ribs. The world feels smaller now, more manageable. The darkness outside might stretch forever, but inside there is still flavor, still ritual, still meaning. The fire's glow deepens to embers. The family breathes in slow rhythm, their bodies heavy with exhaustion and faint warmth. For a moment, time feels thick, suspended like the last wisp of steam above the jug. You close your eyes and listen to the silence that follows, not empty, but full of presence. The warmth of ale, the weight of blankets, the soft chorus of breath all combine into one steady pulse. Sleep comes easily now, not as escape but as agreement with the night. You exhale softly, and in that breath lies centuries of gratitude for every small comfort that ever helped humanity survive the cold. The night folds back in, quiet and immense. The cottage feels smaller now, wrapped tightly in frost. You can sense the change in the air, that brittle stillness that comes when temperatures fall to their cruelest. The fire glows faintly, a trembling heart of red beneath its ash blanket. In the dimness, you hear a sound that has nothing to do with wind or wood, the faint murmur of prayer. It is well known from surviving letters and sermons that medieval peasants prayed before bed, not only out of faith but out of fear. Night was a time of uncertainty. Darkness carried both physical and spiritual threats. A freezing wind could steal life as swiftly as a fever, and invisible dangers seemed to move just beyond the firelight. To close one's eyes, without a blessing, felt reckless. You watch as the father, sitting upright on his straw bed, makes the sign of the cross. His fingers are cracked, the nails blackened with work, but the motion is slow and deliberate. His lips move silently, forming words passed down from parents and priests alike. He prays for the fire to hold, for the walls to stand, for the children to wake again when morning comes. Curiously enough, bedtime prayers in rural communities were often mixed with folk charms. A whispered plea to the Virgin might be followed by a murmured rhyme against frost or spirits. A small cross drawn on the hearthstone, a bit of salt scattered near the door, or an iron knife placed beneath the bed were all common protections. To modernize, it seems like superstition. To them, it was balance, faith for the soul, precaution for the body. In parts of northern Europe, families invoked Saint Brigid, guardian of the hearth, believed to walk the land on cold nights blessing fires. In Italy and France, Saint Nicholas or Saint Genevieve might be called upon for safety. Each village had its patron, its ritual, its tiny act of defiance against the long reach of darkness. A curious note in an old parish record describes a family who carved a cross into the beam above their bed each winter, renewing it every year. They believed the mark would absorb the cold and hold it there, away from their bodies. The beam, blackened with smoke, still bears faint traces of those crosses centuries later. Researchers continue to discuss whether these nightly rituals arose more from religion or from simple habit. In a world where danger lurked in both illness and storm, dividing spiritual and practical safety made little sense. Every gesture mattered. Every word spoken to the air offered comfort. To speak a prayer aloud was to make warmth out of breath. You can hear it now, the mother's voice, low and rhythmic, reciting words in Latin she does not fully understand. In manus tuas, Domine, into your hands, O Lord. The sound fills the room like another form of light. The children stir and murmur half in imitation, their small hands crossing themselves with sleepy devotion. One peculiar charm mentioned in a 14th century collection of household remedies advised saying a blessing while facing each corner of the room before sleep. The motion symbolized sealing the home from evil. Whether anyone expected it to truly work mattered less than the calm it brought. In the act of circling the room, one acknowledged its boundaries, its safety. The cottage itself became a prayer. The wind outside moans faintly through the thatch, and the sound makes the mother pause. She glances toward the door, her eyes catching the faint reflection of the embers. For a heartbeat, she listens. Then she whispers another line, one that belongs not to the church but to old village memory. Keep out the wandering cold. Keep safe the sleeping souls. There is something deeply human in that blend of reverence and fear. To live so close to nature's edge is to understand that faith must be both tender and fierce. It is not lofty, not abstract. It is spoken in the language of survival. Archaeological research on charms found in medieval homes has revealed small tokens tucked into wall cracks or under thresholds. Bits of bone, carved symbols, coins, even children's shoes. People hid them not for wealth but for protection. Each object whispered a wish for safety, sealed into stone like a private prayer. You can almost feel the warmth of that devotion now. The family's breathing slows again. Their prayers finished. The last words drift upward, joining the smoke in the rafters. The fire pops softly, as if answering. The room feels lighter, though the cold has not changed. The air carries the faintest sense of peace, a warmth that is not from fire or flesh but from belief itself. A curious tradition in some villages held that angels walked through homes at midnight, touching the foreheads of those who prayed sincerely. The idea comforts you now, even as an observer centuries removed. It captures something essential about these people, their ability to find gentleness amid hardship. You lie still, eyes half closed, and imagine that unseen presence moving through the small room, brushing against the walls, pausing by the hearth. The prayers linger like perfume. The fire flickers once more, steadying as if fortified by the words. Sleep returns, quiet and deep. Outside the frost thickens, but inside the cottage a fragile warmth holds. It comes not from the fire, not from the blankets, but from faith itself, an invisible shield spun from breath, hope and habit. You drift into dreams that smell faintly of smoke and candle wax. The last sound you hear is the soft murmur of prayer fading into silence, a lullaby woven from devotion and necessity. The night passes slowly, but morning does not arrive with sunlight. It creeps in as a dim grey glow through the parchment window, thick with mist and cold. You wake before the others, feeling your body heavy and stiff, the ache of long hours curled tight for warmth. Every joint protests, every breath clouds in the air. Yet there is something almost comforting in the stillness, as if the world itself has slowed to match your pulse. It is well observed by historians of daily life that sleep during the Middle Ages was not a luxury, but an act of survival. For most peasants, it was less about rest and more about conserving energy. The winter months demanded endurance, not productivity. When daylight lasted only a few hours, the body obeyed nature's rhythm, surrendering to darkness not for pleasure but for preservation. You sit up slightly, the blanket sliding off your shoulders. The cold rushes in instantly, biting against your skin. It feels like the air is made of knives. The fire has gone out, leaving behind a mound of pale ash and a few dark stones that still hold traces of heat. Your breath rises in clouds, visible proof of life in a house that feels almost frozen. Curiously, the body's own reaction to this cold was part of its defense. Studies of historical living conditions show that constant low temperatures slowed metabolism and reduced hunger, allowing people to endure longer periods with less food. In this sense, sleep was nature's rationing system, a way for the poor to stretch meager supplies through endless winters. You glance toward the family still sleeping. The mother and father lie pressed close, their hands intertwined even in dreams. The children have burrowed deep into the straw, their faces hidden, only the tops of their wool caps visible. Their breath mingles with that of the animals behind the low partition, rising in faint mist. The entire room seems to breathe together, one long exhale of endurance. A curious account written by a 15th century monk described sleep as a small death that saves. He observed that peasants in winter seemed to live half their lives asleep, resting not from fatigue but from necessity, To remain awake too long was to burn precious energy, to invite hunger sooner. Sleep became a kind of wisdom. You lie back down for a moment, listening to the strange quiet that follows a night of cold. Outside, there are no birds yet, no sound of travel or work. The world waits, heavy under frost. Inside, your own heartbeat sounds louder than anything else. It is easy to understand how people once filled this silence with meaning, believing that spirits passed through it, whispering between breaths. One peculiar superstition recorded in the Alps claimed that if a sleeper dreamed of fire during the coldest nights, it meant the body was truly freezing, and the dream itself was a warning. Whether true or not, it shows how closely life and dream were linked, how even imagination was pressed into the service of survival. Researchers continue to discuss how medieval people understood rest. Some argue that they saw sleep as sacred, a time when the body and soul were closest to God. Others believe it was viewed more practically, simply as a pause before labor resumed. Yet both ideas share a certain reverence. To close one's eyes in such conditions and wake again was no small victory. The father wakes now, rubbing his face with calloused hands. He reaches toward the hearth, feeling for warmth, and sighs softly when he finds only ash. Without speaking, he stands and pulls on his boots, still stiff with frost. He steps outside into the white air, returning moments later with a few splinters of wood and a small sack of dried peat. The routine is automatic, half prayer, half labor. As the fire begins to crackle again, faint orange light spreads across the walls. The sound is soothing, a small rhythm that fills the silence. The mother stirs, pulling the blanket tighter around the children. You can see her face now, pale but calm, her breath catching the light. She wakes not with complaint, but with acceptance. It was common for peasants to begin their mornings in darkness, tending fires and animals before dawn. The coldest hours, just before sunrise, were often the most dangerous. Frost could bite fingers before one realized it. Still, they moved through the motions with quiet persistence, a rhythm shaped by years of repetition. A curious line from a 14th century prayer book reads, "He who endures the cold endures God's trial." The phrase captures the spirit of this life perfectly. Endurance was not only physical but moral, a kind of devotion through suffering. Warmth was not expected, it was earned. The fire grows stronger, painting the stones in amber again. The dog stirs first, stretching before curling closer to the flames. The goat shakes itself awake, and the soft clatter of its hooves fills the room. The smell of smoke rises, mixed with the faint sweetness of peat. Slowly, life returns to the cottage. You watch as the father breaks a crust of frozen bread, warming it near the fire before sharing it among the family. No one speaks at first. Their faces glow faintly, eyes half closed, caught between fatigue and gratitude. To eat, to breathe, to feel heat again, these are prayers answered without words. A curious thought crosses your mind. Perhaps sleep, to them, was not escape, but transformation. The body shut down to protect itself. The mind drifted inward to forget the cold, and waking became resurrection. Every morning was a small miracle. The light through the window brightens slightly, revealing the frost glittering on the floor stones. The air is still cold enough to sting your nose, but it feels different now, gentler somehow. The fire crackles, the house sighs, and the long night gives way to another day. You close your eyes for a final moment before rising, feeling the faint warmth against your skin. Sleep has done its work. It has carried you through hunger, through cold, through the endless stillness of winter. In this small stone house, survival is not loud or heroic. It is quiet, steady, and deeply human. By the time the sun reaches its highest pale arc, the world outside the stone walls is dazzling white. Snow covers every path, and the air carries the kind of silence that makes even thought move slowly. Inside, however, the day hums with small sounds. The clink of an iron pot, the thud of a log against the hearth, the low moo of the cow shifting in its corner. It is a living quiet, not emptiness, but rhythm. You rest against the wall, listening. Each sound seems magnified in the stillness. The drip of melted frost from the roof, the faint creak of ropes on the bed, the sigh of breath escaping through chapped lips. These noises create the music of a medieval village, the song of endurance beneath snow. It is well noted by travelers and chroniclers that winter nights in the countryside carried their own soundscape. With no carriages, no distant roads, no hum of industry, the world was reduced to its essentials: wind, wood, and the voices of animals. The human ear became sensitive to every nuance. You could tell the weather's change by how the rafters shifted, or how the dog's breathing altered near the door. Curiously enough, people sometimes spoke of the night as having layers of sound. The first was the obvious one: wind and movement. The second belonged to the house itself, the living timbers expanding and contracting with the cold. The third was softer still, what they called the hush, the silence that came when even wind froze. In that silence, many claimed they could hear God thinking. You can almost hear it now, the faint thrum of life contained within these thick walls. The father hums quietly as he sharpens a blade. The mother stirs the pot of thin porridge, the spoon scraping softly against iron. The children play with bits of straw, inventing stories from their own imagination. Every sound feels intimate, deliberate. Archaeological studies and written records suggest that sound carried differently in these homes. The low ceilings and smoke-filled air softened echoes, wrapping every noise in warmth. Conversations rarely travelled far. The next cottage over might be invisible in the snow, and inaudible too. Each family existed in its own small sphere of sound, enclosed by stone and frost. One peculiar tradition noted in some parts of rural France involved placing a small bell on the door latch at night. The tinkling sound served as both alarm and comfort. If it rang suddenly, it might mean wind had forced the door open, or that something larger, perhaps an animal or a thief, had tried to enter. More often, it simply chimed softly when the door moved with the draft, a reminder that the world outside still breathed. Researchers have found that medieval villagers were unusually attuned to these small cues. The sound of cracking ice meant danger to livestock. The quietness of a barn meant illness among animals. Even human sleep responded to this symphony. One ear always stayed half awake. The phrase, "sleeping with one ear open," was not a metaphor but a habit born of necessity. You listen now to the strange dialogue between silence and noise. The fire snaps suddenly, releasing a tiny burst of sparks. The mother laughs softly when one lands near her hand. The goat bleats once, as if in conversation. Then everything falls quiet again, as though the house itself is thinking. A curious note found in a 17th century collection of folklore describes villagers believing that certain sounds predicted weather. The loud popping of a fire meant frost was coming. A creaking roof foretold snow. The sound of dripping water in the middle of the night was a sign of thaw. People did not fear these noises. They interpreted them as conversation between the elements and their homes. You can almost feel that old intuition stirring in you. The more you listen, the more you sense a kind of meaning in the air. The cold itself has a sound, a brittle vibration, like thin glass touched by wind. Each breath you take adds to it, a small contribution to the living silence of winter. The father begins to hum again, a tune without melody, just a repetition of low notes. Perhaps it is a working song from the fields, or a hymn half remembered. His voice blends with the crackle of fire until the two are indistinguishable. The mother joins him for a moment, her tones softer, lilting. The children smile but stay quiet. It is not a song to perform but to inhabit. Curiously, some historians think these quiet household sounds formed a kind of emotional glue. They provided comfort, a rhythm for thought and work. Silence, too, had meaning. It was not emptiness, but peace, a rare state in a world filled with labour. You lie back against the cold wall, eyes half closed, and listen again. You can hear the heartbeat of the house now. Fire, breath, the slow shuffle of animals, the faint hum of voices. Outside, wind brushes across the snow, adding its distant whisper. Inside, life continues, steady and unhurried. The longer you listen, the more it feels like a single organism breathing. The people, the walls, the animals, the fire, all sharing one slow rhythm. This is what kept them alive through endless winters. Not only fire or food, but the deep awareness that they were never truly alone in the dark. As the fire brightens again, shadows move along the walls, their flickering dance matching the sound of the wind outside. The house groans once as the frost tightens its grip, and you realize that even the stones have their own voice. Everything here speaks, if you are quiet enough to hear. You close your eyes and let those sounds settle over you, soft and patient. The cottage hums like an ancient lullaby, and for the first time, the cold seems almost kind. The day fades again, and with it comes the long stretch of night that defines the rhythm of winter. The family settles once more near the hearth, the fire small but steady. The children lean against their mother's side, half asleep already, while the father mends a broken strap by the firelight. The smell of smoke and wool fills the air, and you realize that even love has its own warmth here, measured in quiet gestures rather than words. It is well known from parish marriage records and travellers' accounts that medieval homes offered little privacy. Families lived, worked, and slept in the same space, so the closeness of night brought both comfort and complication. Marriage in such a world was not the affair of candlelit rooms or whispered vows, but of survival, companionship, and the sharing of heat. Curiously, many peasant couples viewed marriage as both sacred and practical. A husband and wife were partners in labor before anything else. Their bond was tested daily by hunger, cold, and the relentless rhythm of work. Yet at night, when the fields slept and the world shrank to the size of a single room, they found something tender amid necessity. You can imagine the intimacy of shared warmth, not the romance of soft words, but the simple connection of two bodies sheltering each other. The bed, narrow and rough, becomes a place of trust. The act of curling close is both affection and survival. To love someone in such a place is to keep them alive. According to village customs recorded in the 13th and 14th centuries, sleeping arrangements often followed practical rules. The parents occupied the main bed with the youngest child, while older children slept nearby. A servant, if one lived with the family, would rest near the door. In some regions, newly married couples shared their bed with a younger sibling until they could afford their own space. Privacy was a luxury of walls and wealth. One curious note found in a rural court record describes a young couple who built a curtain around their bed from patched cloth, calling it the house within the house. It was their only claim to solitude. Historians have found similar accounts elsewhere, small signs of humanity's quiet insistence on tenderness, even when surrounded by noise and necessity. Researchers still discuss how emotional relationships functioned in such cramped quarters. Some believe affection was muted by exhaustion, that love was duty and nothing more. Others, examining letters and folk songs, argue the opposite, that hardship deepened emotional bonds, made gestures more meaningful, words more rare but powerful. When warmth was scarce, the smallest touch mattered most. The mother looks across the fire now, meeting her husband's eyes. They do not speak, but their gaze holds the weight of shared years, shared labor, and shared winters. The line of her mouth softens into a small smile, one that carries more warmth than the flames themselves. He returns it quietly, his work never stopping. In that exchange lies everything that keeps this house alive. Folklore across Europe speaks of fire as a witness to love. Couples were said to pledge themselves before the hearth, believing that the flames sealed their bond. Some villages held that if two people's shadows touched in the firelight, their souls would remain intertwined. In a time when priests were rare and marriages often took place without ceremony, such simple acts were both sacred and binding. A curious poem from a 14th century French collection tells of lovers who share a hearth and hunger. The line captures the reality of peasant affection better than any sermon could. To share warmth, to divide bread, to survive together, these were the vows that mattered. You can almost feel that energy in the air now, quiet but powerful. The father's hand brushes his wife's as he passes her a bowl. The mother tucks the blanket around their children. Every action speaks of care. In this life, love is not declared but performed, again and again, until it becomes habit. Some historians note that even in such poverty, acts of tenderness left their traces. Excavations have revealed carved initials on beams, intertwined symbols, and hearts etched into wood. These markings, hidden above doorways or near beds, are the remnants of private devotion, proof that affection found a way to leave its mark even among stone and straw. A peculiar belief from Eastern Europe held that sleeping apart invited misfortune. Couples who failed to share a bed regularly risked losing their warmth, both literally and spiritually. The idea was practical, but it also hinted at the emotional truth behind it. Closeness was survival, and separation meant cold. You listen to the soft sounds of the family now, the crackle of the fire, the rustle of straw, the faint breathing of those half asleep. It feels like a single rhythm, each heartbeat blending into the next. The cottage itself seems to hum with quiet intimacy. The firelight touches the mother's face, her cheek glimmering with warmth, and the father leans slightly closer, not for conversation, but for presence. The night deepens, and the house grows still. Outside, frost stretches its fingers across the fields. Inside, the closeness of bodies and hearts becomes its own kind of heat. You can feel it wrapping around the room, invisible but unmistakable, the warmth of endurance and affection intertwined. Perhaps this, more than anything, explains how people endured. Fire and wool kept their bodies alive, but love, even in its smallest gestures, kept their spirits from freezing. The house breathes softly, as if it too understands the secret. That warmth begins with touch, and touch begins with care. You close your eyes, and the last thing you hear before sleep returns is the faint sound of two hands meeting under the blanket, a gesture so small that it could vanish in silence, yet powerful enough to outlast the coldest winter. The night has turned quiet again, but the stillness carries a soft weight. You open your eyes and see a small shape moving in the dim light. It is a child, no more than 5 or 6, rising from the straw to crawl closer to the warmth. The mother shifts just enough to make space, and the child burrows in beside her, a small sigh escaping like the exhale of a kitten. It is widely noted in parish and household records that children in medieval peasant homes slept close to their parents, often in the same bed. Separate rooms were a luxury reserved for nobles, and even separate mattresses were rare. Most families shared what they had, layering straw and blankets to make a common nest. This closeness was not a sign of indulgence, but of necessity. The smaller the circle, the warmer the sleep. Curiously, children's places in the bed followed an unwritten order. The youngest slept between parents, while older ones nestled on the outer edges. Sometimes they shared a smaller straw pallet on the floor, covered with cloaks. It was a shifting arrangement, practical rather than planned. The important thing was that no one slept alone. In a winter so severe, isolation was not just lonely, it was dangerous. One travelling friar described visiting a cottage on a freezing night and finding the babes tucked as birds beneath the hen. The image fits perfectly. Children huddled beneath their parents' arms, their small bodies absorbing and giving back heat. The sound of their breathing, light and rhythmic, filled the room like a living lullaby. You watch them now in your mind's eye. The eldest child curls near the edge, clutching a scrap of cloth like a toy. The middle one presses close to the goat's flank for extra warmth, small fingers buried in its fur. The youngest, half awake, blinks at the glowing embers before drifting back into sleep. The parents lie still, exhausted but watchful. A cough, a rustle, a small cry, and someone's hand moves automatically to comfort. This is how love looked when the night was colder than words could express. Researchers of medieval domestic life often point out that such shared sleeping taught children cooperation from birth. They learned to move carefully, to fit their bodies around others, to wake without disturbing the rest. The rhythm of family life was literal, a harmony of breaths and movements repeated night after night. A peculiar account from an English manor roll mentions a fine imposed on a peasant family whose child fell into the hearth during the night. It sounds cruel, but it reveals something important. The hearth, though life-giving, was also perilous. Parents kept their youngest close not just for warmth but for safety. A single spark could turn sleep into tragedy. Curiously enough, lullabies from the era often spoke of both warmth and fear. "Sleep, my heart, till the frost is gone," one old verse begins, "and angels guard the fire till dawn." These songs were not only for comfort but for courage. They told children that the dark would end, that the fire would hold, that their parents' arms were a shield against everything outside. You can almost hear one now, hummed softly into the smoky air. The mother's voice carries the rhythm of a heartbeat, low and steady. The words are simple, but their weight fills the room. Even the animals seem to settle as the melody fades. Historians debate how childhood itself was perceived in these centuries. Some argue that children were treated as small adults, expected to work and obey from an early age. Others believe that within the warmth of homes like this, affection flowed freely, expressed not in grand gestures but in protection and closeness. The truth, as always, is both. In a world where survival was a family task, love was work, and work was love. One curious custom recorded in Scandinavia describes parents giving each child a smooth stone from the hearth at bedtime, warmed briefly in the coals and wrapped in cloth. The child held it against their stomach until sleep came. It was believed to comfort them through the night, a small piece of the fire's strength transferred by touch. You can imagine the glow of such stones, fading slowly, carrying whispers of warmth into dreams. The family here has no such luxury, only the heat of their bodies and the weight of their togetherness. Yet the effect is the same. The children sleep soundly, the youngest murmuring something indistinct before drifting deeper. The mother brushes a strand of hair from the child's forehead. The father's arm stays outstretched, forming a protective barrier between them and the world. Researchers have noted that parents often checked their children's breath in the middle of the night, a quiet instinct born of fear. Sudden death in infants was not uncommon, and with cold, hunger, and sickness always near, vigilance became second nature. To hear a child's soft exhale was reassurance enough to rest again. Outside, the snow thickens. The wind pushes softly against the door but fails to enter. Inside, warmth lingers. The room smells of sleep itself, smoke, wool, and the faint sweetness of straw. The air is heavy but safe. You close your eyes and feel that same peace settle around you. The breath of the children blends with the breathing of the animals, the soft crack of cooling wood, and the sigh of the parents drifting into rest. This is not comfort as we know it. It is something older, more primal. It is the knowledge that warmth survives when shared. You listen to the small sounds of their sleep until the rhythm carries you too. The house fades into quiet, the world into stillness. And somewhere, under the weight of frost and centuries, a child dreams beside the firelight, the same way children always have safe, warm, and loved. The night wears on, and the cottage settles into the kind of silence that feels thick enough to touch. You stir slightly, and the air moves around you, heavy with scent. It is not unpleasant, but layered, rich with the story of everything that happens in this small space. The smell of smoke and peat, wool and sweat, dried herbs, old straw, and the faint sweetness of baked grain all blend into something unmistakably human. It is the smell of life contained within stone. It is well noted in accounts by travellers and early natural philosophers that the scent of a medieval home was impossible to forget. Those who visited peasant cottages often wrote that they smelled of earth and breath. There was no perfume strong enough to mask it, no soap to erase it. The fire burned constantly, and everything, hair, cloth, skin, absorbed its smoke until even the air felt like it had weight. Yet for those who lived here, this was not filth or discomfort. It was familiarity, the perfume of survival. Curiously, not all smells were accidental. Some were deliberately added to fight the less welcome ones. Dried mint, sage, or lavender were hung from the rafters. The mother of the household would scatter herbs near the hearth or crush juniper needles in her hands before sweeping. The sharp scent cut through the smoke and gave the room a fleeting freshness, though the effect rarely lasted long. A peculiar description written by a visiting priest in the early 15th century tells of stepping into a home so smoky that he could not see the faces within until his eyes adjusted. He complained of watering eyes and the taste of soot on his tongue, but admitted that the warmth therein is the warmth of good people. His words, half critical and half admiring, capture the paradox of such places. Unbearable to outsiders, indispensable to those within. Researchers of sensory history have suggested that smell shaped memory more powerfully in this era than sight. Light was scarce, color faded quickly, but scent lingered, marking each season. The smell of burning peat meant winter. The smell of drying grain meant harvest. Even people were identified by scent. The shepherd, the baker, the tanner, each with their own trace of livelihood. Inside the cottage, these aromas mingled until they formed an identity, the fragrance of a single life shared by many. You breathe in now, tasting that air in your imagination. It is warm, thick, and textured, almost tangible. The smoke scratches your throat, but the sweetness of straw softens it. Beneath it all, there is the faint tang of sweat, salt and ash, the scent of bodies that have worked, eaten, and slept side by side for years. To modern senses it might feel oppressive, but to them it meant comfort. To smell the fire was to know it still burned. A curious piece of folklore from the Low Countries claimed that good hearth smoke kept evil spirits away. People believed that clear air invited mischief, while smoke made the house opaque to wandering ghosts. Some families even thanked the smoke aloud before bed, saying it guarded both fire and dreams. Whether the smoke truly protected or not, it gave the invisible a name and purpose. Archaeological evidence shows that the soot inside these cottages accumulated over centuries, turning ceilings and beams almost black. Yet the soot preserved the wood, sealing it from rot and insects. The same substance that choked lungs also saved homes. The balance between harm and help was constant, and people learned to live inside it as naturally as breathing. You imagine the family now, asleep within this living cloud of scent. The father's cloak smells of hay and damp leather, the mother's blanket of wool and milk, the children's hair faintly of the goat they sleep beside. These odors are not separate from them, but part of their identity, proof of what they love and depend on. When one member leaves for a journey or pilgrimage, the absence of their smell lingers like silence. Some experts have noted that smell served as emotional language long before words could express it. To breathe the same air as your family, your animals, your home was to belong. There was comfort in familiarity, even when it was pungent. In a time without perfumes or soaps, the scent of smoke and sweat became the scent of love itself. A curious household practice recorded in village notes from Normandy describes airing bedding on rare sunny days. Families carried their straw mats outside and let the cold wind whip through them. The smell of the earth, the frost, and the wind replaced the thick indoor air for a few hours. When they brought the bedding back in, the freshness clung for just one night, enough to make the act worth repeating. You can almost feel that difference now, the contrast between the crisp outside air and the smoky warmth within. The two worlds meet at the doorway each time it opens, trading scents like polite guests. For a moment, you breathe deeply, pretending to draw in both the clean cold of the morning and the deep, slow musk of life inside stone walls. Historians continue to discuss how such sensory environments shaped medieval thought. Some argue that living in smoke and earth connected people more deeply to nature, to the cycles of fire and decay. Others believe it dulled their sense of discomfort, forcing acceptance. Perhaps both are true. They lived surrounded by the smell of what sustained them, never separate from it. You shift slightly on the straw, feeling the rough texture against your skin, hearing the soft sigh of the fire. The air feels close but alive, the warmth faint but loyal. You breathe in again, slower this time, and realize how deeply the scent defines the space. It is not filth or inconvenience. It is memory itself, hovering in every corner. Outside, the frost deepens. Inside, the scent of smoke curls lazily toward the rafters, where it will linger for years. You close your eyes, letting that invisible history fill your lungs, a reminder that to live in such a place was to inhale the story of your own endurance. The morning creeps in slowly, pale light spilling across the rough floor. You blink and see your own breath drifting in faint clouds. The fire has gone out again, leaving behind a mound of grey ash and a few glimmering coals. The warmth has vanished with the night. Your body, heavy with sleep, resists the idea of rising, but the cold is persuasive. It pricks at your skin, reminding you that survival is never still. It is recorded in travellers' journals and household accounts that frost often formed inside peasant cottages during the coldest months. Water in cups froze solid, and thin sheets of ice coated the walls nearest the door. Some mornings, families awoke to see their own footprints marked in frost where the cold had crept along the floor in the dark. To us, it might sound unbearable. To them, it was simply winter's way. You sit up and watch the faint sparkle of frost on the inside of the door. It catches the morning light like glass. The floor feels hard beneath your feet, the chill biting straight through to the bone. Around you, the family stirs. The mother rubs her hands briskly, blowing on her fingers before reaching for the poker. The father kneels by the hearth, his breath fogging the air as he searches for a spark. A curious detail from local parish notes mentions that some families slept with buckets or jugs of water beside the fire, not for drinking but to keep it from freezing solid. The water acted as a small heat buffer, preventing frost from reaching the heart of the house. Even so, it was common to wake and find thin ice on its surface, a delicate mirror that cracked with the first touch of a hand. Archaeological evidence supports this vision of frozen mornings. Layers of soot and frost residue found on inner walls suggest that homes regularly dropped to near outdoor temperatures before sunrise. The thick stone held cold as efficiently as it once held warmth. There were no quick remedies, only movement and patience. You can see it now. The father crouches near the hearth, gently blowing on the last red ember buried in ash. A faint orange glow returns, flickering against his face. He adds a few twigs, then a small piece of wood. The flame trembles, catches and grows. Its light spills outward, touching the walls with soft color. Everyone leans toward it instinctively. It is more than heat. It is reassurance that another day has begun. Curiously enough, the smoke that fills the room once again smells different each morning. It depends on the wood, on the weather, on the dampness in the air. Sometimes it stings the eyes. Sometimes it feels like comfort itself. The fire's renewal is a ritual, performed with care and quiet reverence. The first spark of the day was often called the child's breath in old speech, a symbol of new life returning to the house. The children wake slowly, rubbing their eyes, their cheeks pale with the cold. The mother tucks a blanket around the smallest one and moves closer to the fire. Steam rises from their breath as they speak softly to each other. The father feeds another stick to the flame, his expression calm but weary. This moment between freezing and warmth, between silence and sound, happens every morning of winter, repeated for generations. A curious entry in a monk's journal from 1327 describes visiting a village in midwinter and seeing frost hanging like cobwebs inside the houses. He wrote that even laughter froze quickly there, yet he admired how people smiled anyway. Their joy, he said, is the warmth that the sun has forgotten. His words, half observation and half awe, still ring true across time. You breathe deeply, tasting the dry, cold air. It feels almost sweet in its purity. Outside, the frost clings to every branch and fence post, the world glazed in silver. Inside, the fire slowly wins back the room, pushing shadows and cold into the corners. The smell of wood smoke replaces the sting of ice. Life resumes its quiet rhythm. The mother ladles thin porridge into wooden bowls, steam curling upward in graceful threads. The sound of spoons against wood fills the air. The children eat quickly, their cheeks flushing pink again. For them, frost is simply part of the day, something to laugh at when it melts from their fingertips. Historians still discuss how these daily hardships shaped temperament. Some believe that the rhythm of cold and heat, deprivation and renewal taught patience and gratitude. Others suggest it dulled emotion, forging endurance at the cost of comfort. Yet in moments like this, watching warmth return from the ashes, it feels more like faith, a faith not in miracles, but in routine. You watch as the father opens the door briefly. A gust of icy wind enters, swirling ash into the air. Outside, the world shines under a sky the color of pewter. The cold stings your lungs but sharpens your senses. Every sound feels clean. He closes the door again and the house exhales warmth in return. A curious belief from Old English folklore claimed that when frost formed inside the home, angels had brushed the walls during the night. Children were told that touching it gently would bring luck. Perhaps that was how people gave beauty to hardship, turning the signs of cold into blessings instead of curses. You look at the frost again, faintly melting now in the heat. It runs in tiny rivulets down the wall, carrying with it traces of smoke and age. The house smells of fire once more, and the light grows stronger. For a moment, everything seems to shimmer: the frost, the flame, the breath of life returning. You close your eyes, letting the faint warmth touch your face. The cold is still everywhere, but it no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like part of the pattern, as necessary as air. In the rhythm of freezing and thawing, of silence and flame, you sense the quiet strength that kept these people alive. The frost glitters one last time before disappearing, and you breathe out slowly, as if melting a little of it yourself. The light that filters through the parchment window is grey and thin. The fire is now strong again, its warmth stretching timidly across the floor. The family moves slowly, their bodies stiff from the cold night. The father rises first, pulling on his heavy cloak. He kneels by the hearth, stirring the embers into bright flame. The mother follows, wrapping a scarf around her head as she reaches for a wooden bowl filled with grain. The air hums with the faint rhythm of morning chores. It was common practice in rural Europe for families to begin their days long before the sun rose fully. Winter daylight was precious, too brief to waste. The first task was always the same: revive the fire, for without it nothing else could happen. No food, no light, no comfort. The fire was not only a tool, but a companion that demanded care at every dawn. A curious entry in a 15th century household manual reminds readers to feed the flame as one feeds the soul, with patience and breath. The line feels poetic now, but it was meant literally. To coax a coal into life, one needed slow, steady breath, the kind that came only with practice. Each family member knew the rhythm of this ritual, as essential as prayer. You watch the process unfold in your mind. The father adds kindling. The mother blows gently until the faint orange turns to gold. The smoke rises, twisting lazily toward the roof. Soon the pot is set over the flame, filled with yesterday's broth and a handful of oats. The smell spreads through the room, heavy and sweet. The first meal of the day is small but sacred. Researchers studying medieval households often point out that mornings began in silence. Voices were kept low out of habit, perhaps out of respect for the fragility of the fire. Children watched and learned, their hands clasped around bowls, their eyes reflecting the flame. The house warmed not only through heat but through motion, every breath, every stirred pot, every shared glance. Curiously enough, warmth was also a form of social order. The place nearest the fire belonged to the one working it, usually the mother. The father stood behind her or beside the door, preparing tools or food for the animals. The children stayed farther back, their job to wait until called. Everyone had a place in the choreography of mourning, an unspoken understanding of what must come first. A peculiar detail in an account from a German village tells of families who placed their bare feet near the hearthstones as soon as the fire was alive. The heat against cold skin was said to wake the body faster than food. Some believed it strengthened the heart. Whether superstition or simple pleasure, the ritual gave the day its beginning. You can almost feel that warmth spreading through the room now, slow but sure. The walls, once cold as river stones, begin to exhale their stored chill. The air fills with the scent of wood smoke and oatmeal. The frost on the window softens, dripping into small trails that catch the light. It is a moment of quiet victory, repeated every day for centuries. Historians of daily life have long debated whether medieval mornings carried hope or resignation. Some describe them as beginnings filled with purpose, others as mere continuations of labor without end. Yet to watch this family move, to feel the gentle comfort in their small successes, is to understand that purpose and survival were one and the same. The warmth of the fire, the smell of breakfast, the sound of life returning, all were enough. The mother hands a steaming bowl to her husband. He nods in gratitude but says nothing. Words are unnecessary here. The children eat next, their faces still flushed from sleep. The room glows brighter now, not from sunlight but from flame. It casts gold over every surface, painting even the soot-darkened rafters with a fragile kind of beauty. One curious observation from an early traveller's diary compares peasant homes at dawn to hives stirred by human bees. The writer meant it kindly. There is motion, purpose, and cooperation, each person tending to their role in the quiet hum of necessity. It is the hour of preparation, the hour that decides whether the day will thrive or falter. You notice the sound again, the crack of fire, the faint scrape of spoon against bowl, the whisper of breath between words. Everything in this room feels alive, in motion, yet peaceful. Even the animals stir in time with the family's rhythm. The goat shakes its head, the cow shifts her weight, the dog stretches near the door. Life renews itself in these small gestures. A curious belief from rural Ireland claimed that a good morning fire could foretell the day's fortune. If the flame burned high and steady, it meant the weather would be kind. If it sputtered or filled the room with smoke, trouble was coming. The mother glances at the fire now and smiles faintly. The flames rise cleanly, bright and clear. Perhaps this day will be kind after all. The father steps outside to check the sky, his breath visible in the still air. The frost glitters like powdered glass. He stands there for a long moment, letting the light touch his face, before closing the door behind him. Inside, the warmth holds steady. The family continues their quiet work, bound together by habit, need, and something gentler still, contentment. You breathe in the scent of smoke and grain, letting it fill your senses. The cold still lingers at the edges of the room, but it is no longer the master here. The fire hums softly, a promise renewed. You realize that in the endless repetition of mornings like this, entire generations found meaning. The house has survived another night, and that is enough. Evening returns sooner than expected, as it always does in winter. The light fades quickly, slipping through the cracks of the roof and turning the air the color of pewter. The cold creeps back into the stones, patient and familiar. But tonight feels different. The air hums with something rare, a faint vibration of anticipation. It is a feast night, one of the few times when warmth belongs to everyone. It is well recorded in both parish chronicles and manor logs that winter festivals were the heartbeats of medieval life. After weeks of meagre meals and silence, the village would gather its strength to celebrate. These moments of abundance, often tied to holy days or harvest ends, were less about luxury and more about remembering joy. Food, drink, firelight and laughter replaced the daily monotony of endurance. Inside the cottage, the family prepares early. The father has returned from the fields with a small joint of salted meat, precious as treasure. The mother grinds grain into coarse flour, mixing it with honey and milk for bread. The smell of roasting fat and yeast fills the air, blending with smoke and transforming the small space into something almost sacred. Curiously, on feast nights, the fire was fed generously. Wood that would normally be rationed was burned freely, and the flames leapt higher, washing the walls with orange light. The glow reached even the darkest corners, and for once, no one cared if the smoke stung their eyes. Warmth itself became a symbol of gratitude. A peculiar entry in a 14th century household ledger describes how families saved scraps of dried fruit or nuts all year for these evenings. Mixed into bread or porridge, they became treats fit for celebration. Children would wait all day for that moment, hands clasped, the scent teasing their hunger. The first taste was always taken in silence, as if acknowledging that joy too required reverence. Researchers of medieval culture often note that warmth and feasting were inseparable. The act of gathering around the hearth was both physical and emotional nourishment. The same fire that kept frost from the door also baked bread, cooked meat, and lit faces with its glow. In this shared light, families felt larger than they were, connected not just by blood but by the shared rhythm of survival. You can almost see it now. The fire burns bright, crackling like laughter. The children sit cross-legged on the floor, their eyes wide as the father turns the meat over the flames. The mother hums a tune from her childhood, a soft melody that fits perfectly into the sound of sizzling fat. Even the goat shifts closer, the reflection of the fire dancing in its eyes. Folklore from several regions claimed that spirits of the ancestors visited homes on winter feast nights. It was said that they sat quietly by the fire, invisible but content, joining in the warmth they once knew. To honor them, families left a small portion of food near the hearth, a gesture of remembrance and respect. Whether or not the dead truly came, the living felt them near. A curious detail from an old French sermon advises that to eat well on a cold night is to praise the Lord for fire. It might sound quaint, but the theology of warmth ran deep in peasant faith. The ability to heat a meal, to share it, to laugh together in the face of hardship, these were seen as signs of divine mercy. As the meal begins, the father cuts small portions carefully, handing each to the family. No one eats quickly. Each bite is savoured, as though tasting the sun itself. The fire throws gold across their faces, and for a moment, the cottage seems to expand, large enough to hold the whole world. Outside, snow falls softly. The wind has died, leaving the night still. The faint light from other cottages flickers in the distance, each one a tiny echo of this same ritual. Somewhere, a bell rings faintly from the church tower. Its tone travels through the frost, clear and sweet, and settles like a blessing over the village. Historians have often wondered how such simple gatherings could leave such deep impressions. Perhaps it is because warmth, once shared, becomes memory. Each feast night etched itself into the heart, carried through the long, empty weeks that followed. The laughter of this evening will return in the darkest hours of February, when cold and hunger press hardest. Memory itself becomes a second fire. You watch as the family finishes their meal. The father leans back, smiling quietly. The mother wipes her hands on her apron, her eyes soft with satisfaction. The children giggle at nothing in particular, full of warmth and food. The fire burns lower now, its light calmer, gentler. Someone begins to hum again, a slow tune that fills the room with drowsy contentment. A curious note from an old Scandinavian proverb says, "The fire that laughs tonight will remember you tomorrow." Perhaps the villagers believed their hearths held a kind of spirit, one that responded to kindness and joy. You imagine the flames flickering as if listening, the smoke curling upward like breath made visible. The night deepens, the feast is done. The family draws close again, lying near the cooling embers. the air still fragrant with roast and wood. Outside, snow keeps falling, but it seems softer now, kinder. The world, for one brief evening, has given back what it took. You breathe in deeply, and the scent of fire and food fills your lungs. Warmth lingers long after the flames die. For the first time in weeks, the night does not feel like survival. It feels like celebration. You close your eyes, hearing the faint sound of laughter echo in the corners. A promise that life, no matter how fragile, can still glow bright against the cold. The feast has ended, yet the warmth of it lingers like perfume. The air inside the cottage feels thicker, almost golden from the fire's memory. The children have fallen asleep quickly, curled together on the straw with faint smiles on their faces. The mother hums quietly as she tidies what remains of the meal, her movements slow, deliberate and calm. The father sits by the dying fire, his hands open toward it, as if in quiet conversation with the fading light. It is well attested in chronicles and family letters that after feast nights, a rare sense of peace settled over homes like this. It was not celebration in the grand sense, but something smaller and more profound, a pause, a breath taken between the endless demands of winter. The fire's glow lasted longer on those nights, as if reluctant to leave. The air smells faintly of meat and smoke, but also of rest. Even the animals seem quieter, lulled by the warmth. The cow exhales heavily in its corner, the dog twitches in dream, and the goat shifts once before going still. A single log collapses in the hearth, sending up a soft shower of sparks that fade almost as soon as they appear. You sit in the hush that follows and realize that this quiet is not emptiness. It is fullness, the sound of everything that needs no words. In the Middle Ages, silence was not feared as it is today. It was understood as space, a kind of sacred stillness that followed effort and gratitude alike. A curious detail in a 15th century spiritual guide advises peasants to let their minds cool as the embers do. The phrase feels almost modern in its wisdom. To slow down after labor, to let the heart find its rhythm again, was seen as both moral and physical necessity. Life demanded balance between movement and stillness, sound and silence, heat and cold. You can almost feel that cooling now. The fire no longer roars but murmurs softly, like a river under ice. The faint glow of its last coals turns everything in the room into shades of amber and brown. The shadows of the sleeping family stretch across the walls, delicate and long. Even the air seems to sigh. Historians of medieval domestic life often note that nights like this were when stories were told slowly, in the dark, to the rhythm of a fading fire. The tales were old ones, saints and miracles, foxes and kings, clever wives and wandering spirits. They were not written down but passed along through memory, a chain of spoken warmth stretching across generations. You imagine the father beginning one of those tales, his voice low and rough from years of work. The children, half asleep, murmur responses when the story reaches a familiar part. The mother listens with a faint smile, her hands still busy with her needle, mending a tear in the blanket. The story unfolds like a dream, its words carried on the soft hiss of smoke. A peculiar record from a travelling scholar in the 14th century describes sitting among peasants and listening to their stories, astonished by their detail. He wrote, "Their words move as embers move, glowing brighter with each telling. That is how it feels now, every sentence, another spark, another heartbeat in the dark." You realize that these stories were not only entertainment but protection. They filled the silence, pushing back the cold and the unknown that waited outside. The mind, warmed by imagination, found courage where the body could not. To speak was to keep the night at a safe distance. Folklore from rural Ireland tells of homes where it was believed that as long as one person spoke kindly before bed, the house would not freeze. Words themselves were warmth, sound shaping air into comfort. Perhaps that is why the family here seems so calm. Their stories and songs have wrapped them tighter than any blanket could. The fire dwindles further, its glow faint but steady. The father's voice trails off mid-sentence, his head droops slightly. The mother sets her mending aside, stretching her stiff fingers. The room glows with the last color of flame, deep orange fading toward silver. It feels like the world itself is preparing to rest. Researchers have long debated whether medieval people experienced true stillness, surrounded as they were by constant labor and hardship. Yet moments like this answer the question. Stillness was not the absence of struggle, it was its completion. The quiet after work, after hunger, after warmth. This was peace earned, not given. You take a long breath, feeling it echo in your chest. The air has cooled, but the smell of wood smoke and roasted grain still lingers. You imagine the taste of the night's meal on the tongue, the faint sting of ash in the throat, the softness of straw beneath your body. Every sensation feels both real and timeless. Outside, the wind returns in gentle whispers. It brushes against the door, tests the cracks in the wall, and sighs through the thatch like a distant lullaby. Inside, nothing stirs. The fire is almost gone now, its last coal pulsing slowly, like the final heartbeat of the day. You lie down once more, feeling the straw shift under you, and pull the blanket up to your chin. The air cools against your face while the rest of you remains warm. The sounds fade one by one, until only the faint crackle of cooling ash remains. The quiet stretches wide, not empty but vast, as if it holds all the dreams of those who have slept here before you. In that quiet, you understand the true rhythm of this life. Struggle, warmth, gratitude, silence. Each night is an ending and a beginning, a slow surrender to the same eternal cycle that shaped the hearts of everyone who ever lived within stone walls and trusted fire to see them through the dark. The last of the fire fades into shadow, leaving behind a faint red glow that clings stubbornly to the ash. The house breathes in silence, its walls thick with the memory of warmth. You lie awake for a while, eyes open to the dark, and you can almost feel the weight of centuries pressing gently against the still air. Everything is quiet now. Even the wind seems to hold its breath. It is well recorded by chroniclers and household historians that winter nights often ended this way. Slow, still, and sacred. No candles, no lanterns, just darkness wrapped around the faint pulse of the hearth. The human eye learned to see in shades of shadow, to read the outlines of loved ones by the ghostly glow of cooling embers. To those who lived here, this was not emptiness, but completion. You listen carefully. The dog sighs once in its sleep. The goat shifts its hooves softly against the straw. Somewhere under the roof, a beam creaks as frost tightens its grip. The sounds are small, familiar, and strangely reassuring. In a world without clocks, this was the language of time, breath, wood, and silence. A curious entry in an old Benedictine text describes the dark as a form of grace. It claimed that the absence of light allowed the soul to rest, freed from distraction. Perhaps that is what you feel now. The darkness is not frightening but gentle, protective. It hides hardship, softens thought, and turns everything that moves into a kind of dream. The father stirs once, instinctively checking the hearth. His hand hovers above it, then withdraws when he feels no more heat. Satisfied that the coals are safe, he settles again, pulling his cloak over his shoulder. The mother shifts beside him, her breathing slow and steady. The children lie motionless, wrapped in shared warmth. Their faces glow faintly from the last reflection of the embers. You realize how small this space is, yet how large it feels. Within a few square meters, the entire story of survival unfolds. Fire, food, faith, and love. The night does not hide these things. It holds them. Outside, frost spreads across the fields like a silent tide. Inside, the air thickens with breath and memory. Historians have often remarked on the patience of medieval nights. Without the hum of machinery or the glare of light, people simply existed with the dark. They listened to it, trusted it, and let it shape their thoughts. It was in these long hours that dreams took their truest form, blending the sacred and the ordinary into visions that belonged only to firelight and sleep. A peculiar story collected from a northern village tells of families who believed that the last spark of the fire held the soul of the night. To blow it out completely was bad luck, but to let it fade on its own was a blessing. The flame, they said, carried their prayers upward with the smoke. You can almost picture the faint trail curling into the rafters, vanishing into the cold beyond. You close your eyes and breathe deeply. The air is cool now, touched with smoke, wool, and the faint sweetness of hay. The smell is both real and dreamlike, a bridge between waking and rest. The rough blanket scratches lightly against your cheek. Beneath it, the straw shifts with every heartbeat. You feel the world shrinking gently around you until it becomes only warmth, breath, and sound. The line between waking and sleeping blurs. You imagine the fields outside, covered in snow, waiting silently for spring. The trees stand like sentinels in the moonlight. The frozen river gleams faintly, its surface smooth as glass. Far above, stars scatter across the sky, sharp and unbothered by the cold. The same stars the peasants saw 1,000 years ago, the same light that watched them sleep. Inside the cottage, time has no edge. It moves in circles, flame to smoke, breath to frost, silence to dawn. You understand now how people survived the endless winter. It was not just by fire or food, but by rhythm. They accepted cold as part of living, and in that acceptance found peace. The fire's last glow fades into blackness. The house becomes one with the night, indistinguishable from the world around it. The only light left is the faint silver drifting through the parchment window, soft as milk. It rests on the sleeping faces, on the walls darkened by smoke, on the rough beams that hold everything together. And then, at last, you let go. The body softens, the mind drifts, and the house breathes with you. There is no fear, no hurry, only stillness. Outside, frost thickens on the ground, but inside, the warmth of human life endures, pulsing quietly in the dark. You understand now why they did not freeze. The secret was never the fire alone. It was togetherness, the shared breath, the layered blankets, the patience of waiting for light. It was the rhythm of survival turned into art. And as you drift into sleep, you carry that rhythm with you, as ancient as the stones, as tender as the last ember dying into ash. The world fades into quiet silver. The frost outside the cottage glows under a sky scattered with stars. Inside, everything rests. The air is cool, but no one feels the cold anymore. The warmth lingers invisibly, woven into straw, wool, and dreams. The house itself seems to sleep, its timbers creaking softly like the breathing of an old friend. You can still smell the faint sweetness of the fire that burned hours ago. The scent hangs like memory, wrapping around the sleeping family. Each of them has folded into the warmth of the other, hands and hearts touching in the dark. There is no need for speech now. The night understands everything. Outside, the wind drifts across the frozen fields, smoothing the snow until it shines. Somewhere far away, a church bell tolls once, deep and low, and the sound travels like a whisper through the air. The cottage listens but does not stir. Within these walls, time has slowed to the pace of breath. You imagine lying there with them, hearing the rhythm of their dreams, feeling the calm weight of centuries settle around you. The fire may be gone, but the heat remains. The darkness feels soft, not empty but full of life that waits quietly for the dawn. Soon, the first light will come again, pale and cold, touching the stones, waking the house, calling another day into being. But for now, the world sleeps, and so do you. The last ember glows once more, a tiny sun caught in ash, then fades into perfect peace. Good night.